Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we dive beneath the waves, where ancient cities sleep in silence, cloaked in coral and whispered legends. The sea glows with phosphorescent calm, but down where the light doesn't reach, stone roads stretch across the ocean floor, ruins tell stories no one remembers, and entire civilizations lie forgotten beneath layers of sand and salt. It's a gentle descent at first, a soothing slide into history's long-forgotten corners, but don't get too comfortable. If these places were swallowed once, they probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere exotic, or just your childhood bedroom, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see how far these ripples travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The water presses closer as we descend through midnight blue, and then a faint shimmer. Shapes start to appear beneath the surface like dreams half remembered. Crumbled walls, eerie symmetry, archways framing nothing but fish. This is where our journey begins, with the haunting suggestion that beneath the calm sea, entire worlds once breathed air. For centuries, humans have suspected that something incredible lies beneath the waves. Not just sunken ships or scattered bones, but entire cities. And not just cities lost to a fluke wave or pirate mischief, but advanced, sprawling civilizations that flourished on now-vanished coastlines, only to be swallowed by an unforgiving sea. It's not just myth, it's becoming science. Our earliest hint? The stone ruins spotted off the coast of modern-day India, Greece and the Caribbean. Not every anomaly turns out to be man-made, of course. Nature loves to prank hopeful archaeologists with formations that look a little too perfect, but some discoveries defy the odds. They display straight lines where randomness should reign, staircases descending into sand, and even carvings that only the bravest barnacles cling to now. Let's pause and drift backward for a moment to imagine what these places once looked like. Picture a bustling marketplace framed by terraced stone buildings, sea air replaced by the scent of spiced meats and heated stone. Somewhere a child runs across tiled steps, chasing a lizard. Bells ring, and then, sometime later, the tide creeps up a little higher than usual. The wind changes, the water doesn't recede. You might be wondering, how could an entire city just vanish? The answer, unfortunately, is too simple. Water always wins. Coastlines are fragile things, subject to tectonic plates, tsunamis, glacial melt, and rising seas. Over thousands of years, what once was prime real estate becomes seabed. Back when our ancestors first started stacking stones into villages, sea levels were far lower than today. Glaciers had trapped much of the planet's water, leaving massive stretches of land exposed. So civilizations built near rivers and bays, as people always do, only to see the tide claim their homes generation by generation. And we're not just talking about a few feet of shoreline. At the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose by over 120 meters, enough to swallow most modern coastlines and several of your favourite beachfront Airbnb spots. As waters surged, ancient villages, towns and even cities would have gradually or suddenly disappeared. And unlike a forest or mountain plateau, underwater ruins are hard to detect, let alone excavate. That's why we're only just beginning to glimpse what might lie beneath. Some of the earliest underwater clues came from fishermen and divers. Off the coasts of Japan and India, reports trickled in of odd stone shapes far below the surface. At first, these were dismissed as illusions or natural formations, but curiosity has a way of prying open history's locked doors. In time, sonar imaging and scuba expeditions started confirming what local legends had long whispered. Entire streets, buildings and plazas now lie beneath the ocean, preserved in eerie stillness. One of the most visually striking sites was discovered in the early 1960s near the island of Yonaguni, Japan, but we'll explore that strange stair-stepped monolith later. Right now, we're drifting toward a lesser-known find off the coast of western India, where the city of Dwarka allegedly sank beneath the sea thousands of years ago. Described in ancient Sanskrit epics, Dwarka was said to be the golden city of Lord Krishna, a place of wonders and symmetry. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as purely mythical, the stuff of poetry and allegory. Then, divers found something. Off the coast, submerged beneath the layers of sediment, were geometric structures, walls, steps, and what looked suspiciously like gridded city planning. Marine archaeologists began recovering pottery shards, tools, and even anchor stones, suggesting that something had indeed existed here, something older than most believed. While debates still rage over the exact dating and scale of these remains, one thing became clear: ancient texts weren't always exaggerating. Sometimes they were eyewitness accounts written in the only language available, myth. And that's a recurring theme as we navigate through this submerged world. Myths that once felt too extravagant, like those of Atlantis, begin to take on a different hue when viewed through the lens of underwater archaeology. For all we know, Plato's grand tale may have been inspired by vague memories of real places lost to catastrophe, reshaped by centuries of retelling. Scholars still argue whether Atlantis was a metaphor, a memory, or merely a brilliant philosopher's daydream. But the idea that entire cities can be lost to water, that's no longer fiction. There's also a practical reason so many ancient sites ended up underwater. People tend to build near water. Rivers, deltas, and coastlines are lifelines for any early settlement. Access to fishing, trade, and transport practically demands it. But that also means they're the first to fall when the sea decides it wants a little more space. And as climates shifted, as ice melted and earthquakes jolted coastlines, many cities faced a cruel choice: flee inland or sink. Of course, not every submerged ruin can be traced back to sea level rise. Some were pulled under by earthquakes, buried by landslides, or even deliberately flooded. Take Baiae, for example, a Roman resort town full of villas and bathhouses, now lying under the waters of the Bay of Naples. Earthquakes and volcanic activity shifted the land, not the sea. But more on that swanky Roman ghost town later. As we glide over these sunken stones, another mystery presents itself. How old are they? And who built them? This is where things get muddy. Carbon dating becomes trickier when materials are underwater and scattered. Marine life contaminates layers. Even sand can distort timelines. So while archaeologists cautiously declare some sites to be 4,000 to 5,000 years old, fringe theorists love to go bigger: 10,000 years, 20,000, even 100,000. And while some of those dates belong firmly in the Shor-Jan category, they do expose a wider question: how much have we missed? After all, only a tiny fraction of the ocean floor has been thoroughly explored. Most of our ocean maps are based on sonar readings, from ships that didn't even bother to look closer, unless oil was involved. So if a city sank today in the middle of the Atlantic, chances are no one would find it for decades, if ever. Now imagine that same level of disinterest 10,000 years ago. Which brings us to a fun little thought. Maybe the sea doesn't hide our history. Maybe it's our own laziness, our landlocked focus, that's to blame. After all, we spend billions mapping the stars but barely scratch the sea. What secrets could be just a few fathoms below our beach vacations? Even now, as we hover over a ghostly mosaic floor somewhere off the coast of Crete, the questions pile up. What stories were told here? Who carved the steps now crawling with barnacles? What rituals, triumphs, or tragedies unfolded on these drowned plazas? And perhaps most curiously, what caused the water to rise? That question will follow us for the rest of this journey. Because the oceans, for all their beauty, are not gentle archivists. They rearrange everything. They warp wood, crush stone, and tangle timelines. And yet, they also preserve. In their silence and cold, they can freeze history mid-breath, capturing an entire city in the instant it was claimed. The ocean doesn't forget. We're the ones who do. Somewhere between myth and silt, the city of Atlantis floats eternal, untouched by time, unmoored by evidence, yet forever bobbing on the tides of imagination. And if there's one thing we've learned about stories, it's that the longer they drift, the more they pick up. Tonight, we follow that drift, not just through Plato's original fable, but into the deep waters of all the Atlantis lookalikes that cropped up across history. The first recorded mention of Atlantis comes from Plato around 360 BCE, nestled inside two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. In them he describes a highly advanced civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, said to have existed some 9,000 years earlier. This Atlantis was not just wealthy, it was almost obnoxiously perfect. Think symmetrical architecture, canals of fresh water, enormous gold statues, and armies so efficient they nearly conquered the known world. But, as the story goes, the Atlanteans became arrogant. The gods, never fond of hubris, decided to wipe the city off the map in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods. Classic overkill. Historians still argue whether Plato intended this as allegory or reportage. Some believe Atlantis was a warning tale, his philosophical mic drop about the dangers of imperial ambition. Others suspect he was drawing from older Egyptian stories, relayed to him by his mentor Solon, who had allegedly heard tales of a sunken island from priests in Sais. Either way, Plato certainly lit the fuse. The story exploded through time, reappearing in everything from Victorian pseudoscience to Marvel movies. What's odd, though, is how many cultures tell eerily similar stories. Let's paddle over to the Azores, that lonely archipelago in the mid-Atlantic. For centuries, sailors spun tales about underwater roads, strange stone structures and lights flickering beneath the surf. One theory, popular among early Atlantologists, was that the Azores were the mountain peaks of a drowned continent. Maps from the 16th and 17th centuries even showed imaginary islands nearby, like Antillia and High Brazil, named and drawn long before any confirmed sightings. Cartographers, it seems, were less concerned with accuracy and more with vibes, and while most of those islands turned out to be figments, the lingering pattern remains, a fascination with sunken lands that once held knowledge, power, and tragedy. The assumption is often the same. If it's underwater, it must have been important, and if we lost it, it must have been our fault. In the 1800s, Atlantis fever gripped European scholars and mystics alike. Ignatius Donnelly, a US congressman with a flair for the dramatic, published Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, in 1882. It argued that Atlantis wasn't just real, but the seedbed of all ancient civilizations, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, even Mesoamerican. He cited architectural similarities, flood myths, and the marvels of language to suggest that a now-lost mother culture had once taught the world its first great lessons. The academic community responded with a resounding "please stop," but the public couldn't get enough. Donnelly's book sold wildly, birthing a fringe Atlantis movement that would, like its subject, refuse to sink. Even today, Atlantis hunters scour the globe, or rather the ocean, for any sign of a city matching Plato's description. Trouble is, his tale was vague on coordinates and bloated on symbolism. Was Atlantis really a single place? Or was it a composite? A collection of sunken memories passed down from several flood-battered cultures. It wouldn't be the first time oral traditions mashed multiple events into a single epic. Take the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, for instance. They were sophisticated, sea-loving, and vanished abruptly around 1450 BCE. Many archaeologists point to the massive volcanic eruption on nearby Thera, modern-day Santorini, as the likely culprit. The blast was one of the largest in recorded history, sending ash clouds across continents and triggering tsunamis that decimated coastlines. Sound familiar? A once proud maritime civilization, brought low by hubris and natural disaster, it ticks all the Atlantis boxes. Then there's Tartessos, a mysterious city said to have existed in southern Spain, near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River. Ancient Greek texts speak of its wealth, artistry, and sudden disappearance. Archaeologists have uncovered ruins in the Doñana marshlands that some believe could be linked to Tartessos. Could this have been Atlantis, misremembered and relocated in Plato's narrative to a more poetic distance? Historians still argue about that too, but perhaps the most curious twist in the Atlantis saga isn't geographic, it's ideological. By the 20th century, Atlantis had become a mirror. For some, it reflected utopia, advanced tech, free energy, a society in harmony. For others, it revealed dystopia, a world punished for arrogance, its greatness turned to rubble. Fringe theorists piled on. Some claimed Atlanteans had mastered anti-gravity. Others believed survivors fled and founded Egypt and the Americas. And still others tied Atlantis to extraterrestrials, Lemuria, or the lost continent of Mu. More on those fantastical cousins later. At this point, Atlantis had grown beyond archaeology. It had become an idea, elastic, persistent, and perfectly suited for any theory that needed a missing link. One mainstream thread worth tugging, however, is geological. Around 11,600 years ago, global sea levels rose rapidly due to melting glaciers at the end of the last ice age. This aligns oddly well with the date Plato assigned to Atlantis' demise. Coincidence? Maybe. But it also corresponds to the Younger Dryas period. a sudden return to cold conditions, which many believe ended in a cataclysmic flood. Some scientists suggest a comet impact may have triggered these changes, although evidence remains debated. But if Plato's tale is based on something real, this period offers fertile ground for speculation. Even skeptics concede that civilizations could have existed in coastal zones now underwater. The trouble is, we've explored only a sliver of the submerged world. What if entire cultures sprang up, flourished, and disappeared in those now drowned lands? We wouldn't know unless we found stone ruins, and even then, dating them and proving human craftsmanship is no easy task. This brings us to an important twist in our narrative. While Atlantis hogs the spotlight, it's far from unique. Around the world, ancient flood myths echo the same refrain: people, land, knowledge, lost to the sea. And sometimes they come with tantalizing archaeological crumbs. Take the Gulf of Khambat, off India's western coast. In the early 2000s, a sonar survey revealed geometric patterns on the seabed: rectangular grids, long straight walls, and stepped formations. Some interpreted them as remains of a 9,000-year-old city, submerged in what would have been a river valley during lower sea levels. Critics were quick to point out that natural formations can fool even the best sonar tech, but divers also recovered artifacts, pottery shards, human teeth, that seem to support habitation. The debate rages on. Is this another Atlantis, or just another chapter in the long, soggy saga of civilizations built too close to the tide? And what about the Caribbean? Off the western tip of Cuba, sonar images in 2001 showed symmetrical structures more than 600 metres below the surface. Described as pyramid-like and resembling urban layouts, the formation stirred headlines and theories. Had a city really sunk here? At such depth, it would have had to happen over 10,000 years ago. Mainstream archaeology rolled its collective eyes, but no one could definitively explain the shapes either. The site remains unverified, yet persistently intriguing. Each new underwater anomaly adds fuel to the fire. Each sonar ping that returns a square shape, each diver who brushes silt off a carving keeps the question alive. How much have we lost beneath the sea? Of course, not all stories are equal. Some discoveries turn out to be nothing more than wishful thinking, misidentified rocks, or outright hoaxes. The line between archaeology and Atlantis obsession is notoriously slippery. For every peer-reviewed excavation, there's a YouTube video with dramatic music and blurry footage claiming proof of the real Atlantis. Spoiler alert, it's always somewhere different. Still, we can't deny the appeal. Atlantis endures because it sits at the intersection of loss and longing. It represents a world more advanced than ours, punished for overreaching, yet somehow still just within reach. The idea that we could rediscover it, that some dive or scan might crack the mystery wide open, is too seductive to dismiss. And so, the search continues. We peer into murky water, track irregular sonar returns, argue over sediment layers. Because maybe, just maybe, Plato was onto something. Maybe he wasn't talking about one city, but a memory of many, a patchwork recollection of a world before the flood. One that reached too far, glittered too brightly, and vanished too fast. Somewhere in the depths, the sea holds her breath. And who knows what waits? Just a few fathoms down. The sunlit turquoise waters of the Bahamas seem far too inviting to hide secrets. Tourists skim their fingers along the surface without a thought for what lies beneath, blissfully unaware that, just off the coast of North Bimini Island, a line of massive stone blocks sits under shallow waters, baffling divers and sparking debates that ripple from geology to archaeology to the far edges of pseudoscience. Welcome to the Bimini Road, one of the most hotly contested underwater formations in the Western Hemisphere. First spotted by pilots and divers in 1968, the Bimini Road consists of a neatly aligned path of rectangular limestone blocks stretching roughly 800 metres beneath the waves. To the untrained eye, it looks like a forgotten highway, paved with massive stone slabs now sun-bleached and swaying with marine growth. It was discovered just 1 year after Edgar Cayce. Yes, that Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, predicted that remnants of Atlantis would be found near Bimini between 1968 and 1969. Naturally, the timing made conspiracy theorists do underwater backflips. And fair enough, this formation does not look natural at first glance. The blocks are eerily uniform, many measuring several metres across. They appear to be arranged in a linear formation, with some sitting atop one another, almost like toppled walls or foundations. For those already enchanted by the Atlantis myth, it seemed like a submerged smoking gun. But here's where the sea mud thickens. Geologists soon chimed in, explaining that these blocks are composed of beach rock, a naturally occurring form of cemented sand and shell that can fracture into neat right angles over time. According to this camp, what we see at Bimini is a perfectly normal geological process, one that can mimic human craftsmanship a little too convincingly. The rectangular shapes, fracture planes, the aligned layout, coincidence meets tidal patterns. Yet, others aren't so quick to wave the dismissive flag. Some researchers argue that certain blocks appear stacked or joined in ways inconsistent with natural formation. They point to what they claim are tool marks, wedge-shaped gaps, and right-angled joints that seem more intentional than coincidental. A few even claim to have found smaller carved stones nearby, possibly ballast or anchor stones used by ancient seafarers. If that's true, then the Bimini Road might be more than a freak geological sculpture. Still, mainstream archaeology stands firm. The formation is interesting, yes, but entirely natural. Most academic journals have long stopped entertaining articles proposing anything more exotic. But in the court of public imagination, the case remains wide open. There's also the matter of Casey's prophecy. Born in 1877, Casey was known for entering trance states and offering spiritual readings, some of which ventured into Atlantis territory. He described the lost continent as highly advanced, with technologies powered by crystals, and predicted its remnants would be discovered near Bimini in the late 1960s. When the Bimini Road was spotted just months after this claim, followers saw it as a celestial mic drop. Was Casey right? Or had his devotees seen what they wanted to see? Historians still argue whether Casey's predictions guided the discovery, or whether the discovery retroactively gave his words more weight. In any case, the association stuck, and to this day the Bimini Road is often touted as Atlantis adjacent. The region itself adds fuel to the fire. The Caribbean and nearby Atlantic zones are riddled with tales of sunken islands, anomalous structures and vanishing ships. The infamous Bermuda Triangle lurks not too far away, its legend built on similarly murky data and nautical folklore. While most incidents have rational explanations, the area's mystique lingers, an atmospheric blend of tropical allure and ominous uncertainty. And then there's the question of age. Carbon dating of nearby organic materials has yielded a wide range of results, some suggesting the stones have been submerged for mere thousands of years, others hinting at much older dates. One study found that certain beach rock in the region dated back to around 2,800 years ago. But as always, dating underwater stone is notoriously tricky. Unlike bones or charcoal, rocks don't betray their secrets easily. And when they're shifted by tides, hurricanes and human curiosity, the puzzle gets messier. Let's not forget the human brain's built-in tendency to seek patterns. Pareidolia is the psychological phenomenon where we perceive recognizable shapes, faces in clouds, animals in rock formations. In underwater archaeology, pareidolia is practically a job hazard. A slightly squared-off stone becomes a step, a linear pile becomes a wall, and a submerged rock platform becomes, well, the lost highway to Atlantis. But what if just once our pattern recognition was right? The idea of a stone road leading to a forgotten city is too tantalizing to dismiss outright. Could the Bimini Road have been part of a harbour, a breakwater, a ceremonial causeway built by a culture now erased by time and tide? If so, what culture was it? The indigenous peoples of the region, like the Lucayans, were not known for megalithic stone construction. Could it predate them entirely? Fringe theorists argue that if the formation is artificial, it must be the work of a civilization unknown to the archaeological record, perhaps even one connected to the much speculated pre-flood world described in global mythologies. That idea, while romantic, raises as many questions as it answers. Where are the tools, the inscriptions, the pottery? A road, after all, implies traffic, so where are the footprints? Still, history loves a late reveal. We've only just begun to explore the continental shelves where ancient coastlines once thrived. If settlements existed before the last major sea level rise, most would be hidden under hundreds of feet of water today, far deeper than the Bimini Road. The site's shallow location makes it unusual, Whether that's evidence for a sunken port or a perfectly placed natural fluke is still up for debate. Meanwhile, the road has become a pilgrimage site of sorts. Divers from around the world descend into its warm waters each year, hoping to glimpse history carved in stone. Some bring cameras, others bring dowsing rods. And while they often leave with more questions than answers, they do take with them something equally precious: a sense of wonder. In the end, the Bimini Road may be more about belief than proof. Like the best legends, it straddles the line between what we know and what we hope, and in that liminal space between coral and curiosity, stories take root. And let's not pretend we're immune to those stories. There's something undeniably enchanting about imagining ancient mariners guiding their canoes toward a stone-paved shore, now long submerged. We picture them docking their vessels, trading goods, lighting fires that flicker against limestone walls now buried in sand. Maybe they sang songs that carried across the water. Maybe they disappeared before the sea could sing theirs back. Of course, none of this proves the road is anything more than beach rock behaving unusually. But the mystery is half the charm. One quirky footnote. Some divers have reported feelings of unease near the formation: dizziness, disorientation, even temporary memory lapses. While easily explained by currents, nitrogen narcosis, or the power of suggestion, the experiences add yet another shimmer of eeriness to the legend. After all, the ocean isn't just vast, it's theatrical. And so, the Bimini Road remains, half ruin, half riddle. A perfectly imperfect metaphor for humanity's relationship with the sea, hopeful, hungry for meaning, and never quite sure where the truth ends and the legend begins. We leave its sandy blocks behind now, drifting further into the Atlantic where shadows deepen and sea fans sway like sleeping dancers. Up next, another city, this one wrapped in scripture and mystery, waiting in the silted depths off India's shore. But for now, let your thoughts linger on the road, its silence, its symmetry, and the sense that maybe, just maybe, we're not the first to tread these waters. The sea breathes slowly off the western coast of India. A sleepy churn laps at the shores of Gujarat, where fishing boats drift like beetles on glass, casting lazy shadows across the Gulf of Kambat. But beneath these waters, brackish, swirling and deep, lies a story older than ink, scribed in stone and silence. Here, divers and sonar scans have revealed what might be one of the most astonishing underwater finds in South Asia: the submerged ruins of ancient Dwarka. For centuries, Dwarka was thought to be more legend than location, a celestial city chronicled in the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, built by Lord Krishna himself. According to the text, Dwarka was a jewel of architecture and devotion, a sacred metropolis of golden towers and floating palaces. But when Krishna left the world, the ocean rose and reclaimed his city, washing it away in a divine flood. Myth, poetry, or coded memory? No one could say for sure, until the sea began to give something back. In the early 2000s, a joint expedition by the National Institute of Ocean Technology and the Archaeological Survey of India deployed sonar imaging across the Gulf. What they discovered stunned even seasoned researchers. Beneath roughly 120 feet of murky water lay a scattering of stone structures, arranged with uncanny geometry. Long walls, right-angled turns, gridded layouts. These were not random boulders flung by nature. They looked, for all the world, like a city's bones. Diving teams brought up artefacts, pottery shards, hearths, and even what appeared to be tools. Some items were carbon dated to around 7,500 BCE. That's more than 9,000 years ago. For comparison, that's long before the Great Pyramid, before Sumer, before the wheel. If accurate, it would imply the existence of an urban civilization thousands of years older than any previously known in India, and possibly in the world. Historians still argue over the evidence. While some archaeologists urge caution, pointing out that sonar images can be misleading and the dating of seabed samples notoriously imprecise, others insist this could rewrite everything we know about early civilization in South Asia. It's not often that an entire page of human history gets torn open like this. And let's talk logistics for a moment. Building a city on the coast 9,000 years ago wasn't exactly a risky move. Back then, sea levels were lower due to lingering Ice Age conditions. Much of what is now seafloor was once habitable land, rich, fertile and close to freshwater sources. It made sense to settle there. But as the glaciers melted and the oceans rose, communities like the one off Dwarka's coast would have faced a creeping catastrophe. Picture it. Farmers tending terraced fields that gradually salt over, priests holding ceremonies as tides lap higher each year, traders abandoning docks that vanish beneath the waves. By the time the final wave rolled in, the city may have already been half abandoned, its people scattered inland, their gods folded into memory. And here's the twist. The myth of Dwarka doesn't read like a fabrication. It reads like nostalgia. The Mahabharata describes its fall in haunting detail. The oceans breaking their bounds, engulfing temples and palaces, silencing conches and bells. It doesn't sound like allegory. It sounds like someone remembered watching the city drown. Sanskrit literature isn't alone in this. Many ancient Indian texts, like the Rig Veda and the Puranas, speak of floods, vanished lands, and divine cities reclaimed by the sea. Could they be echoing a real, ancient trauma? A memory passed down orally for generations before being crystallized in verse? The idea isn't far-fetched. Oral tradition is powerful. Australian Aboriginal stories have preserved accurate descriptions of coastlines that vanished 7,000 years ago. If those tales survived in memory, why not India's? One of the fringe theories posits that Dwarka wasn't just a single city, but the jewel in a larger, now submerged civilization, a precursor to the Harappan or Indus Valley cultures. That's a bold claim, of course, and not without criticism. Mainstream scholars warn against leaping to conclusions based on limited finds, but the allure is undeniable. Could it be that Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were merely descendants of something older, grander, and now forgotten beneath the sea? There's also something poetic about the layout itself. Devas describe the structures as possessing a planned feel. Straight lines, orthogonal grids, deliberate spacing. That doesn't happen naturally. If real, this city would have had roads, districts, maybe even temples, and it would have been built with a clear understanding of geometry, engineering, and aesthetics. That's not just culture, that's civilization. Yet, despite the excitement, funding and focus have waned. Bureaucratic red tape, limited dive seasons, and a cautious academic environment have slowed progress. The underwater site lies in a murky limbo, not quite confirmed, not quite dismissed, but it still whispers. A quirky aside? Some Indian astrologers believe Dwarka's alignment matches celestial events tied to Krishna's mythology. They point to references in ancient texts that describe constellations and eclipses visible from the city on specific days. Using astronomical software, a few have claimed that these alignments match sky views from around 3000 BCE. Whether that supports the city's antiquity, or is just a happy coincidence is, once again, up for debate. And the debate rages on. Critics argue that some artefacts may have drifted from inland rivers, carried by monsoons or flood currents. Others point out that beach rock and sandstone can break in ways that mimic human-made walls. But supporters remain adamant. Not all blocks fracture at right angles, and nature rarely builds in straight lines. One thing everyone agrees on: more study is needed. The site, though tantalising, is still largely unexplored. Its silt-covered streets and barnacle-crusted blocks have secrets yet to share. Secrets that could rewrite not just Indian history, but human history. Back on the surface, the modern city of Dwarka thrives. Temples rise where gods once stood. Pilgrims gather along the Ghats, dipping into sacred waters, unaware of the ancient ruins buried offshore. It's a curious symmetry. The old city submerged, the new one rebuilt just inland, both dedicated to Krishna. Time, it seems, loops like a spiral shell. As night falls, the tides shift again. Somewhere below, the sea rolls gently across carved stone, moss-filled chambers, and the slow-growing corals that claim all things. The city sleeps on, not destroyed, but tucked away. And so, we drift forward, leaving behind Dwarka's submerged marvels for another ghost city. This one hidden not in myth, but in plain sonar, nestled off a quiet Greek shoreline. But the lesson lingers. Sometimes, the oldest truths lie just beneath the waves, waiting for the right diver, the right question, or the right moment of silence to rise again. The water here is shallow, warm and quiet, almost unnervingly so. Just a few hundred metres from the southern coast of mainland Greece, the sea glimmers with postcard charm. Yet below, hiding beneath a skin of silt and seagrass, lies one of the oldest known submerged cities on Earth, Pavlopetri. It's not a myth, a hunch, or a controversial sonar blip. Pavlopetri is real, and it's old. So old, in fact, that it predates even classical Greece. Estimated to be around 5,000 years old, this sunken settlement offers something rare in the realm of underwater archaeology: certainty. Discovered in 1967 by oceanographer Nicholas Fleming, and later mapped extensively by the University of Nottingham, Pavlopetri delivers the clearest window we have into life in the Bronze Age, a time when Europe's great civilizations were still stretching their limbs. The layout is shockingly modern. Streets run parallel, houses have rooms, distinct ones, with courtyards and entrances clearly defined. There's even evidence of a sophisticated drainage system. We're talking about a city that had zoning and plumbing before the pyramids were completed. Take that suburban sprawl. The ruins cover roughly 4 acres of seabed, resting in just a few metres of water, which makes it accessible but also fragile. Every storm, every boat anchor, every careless snorkeler risks disturbing a site that has survived 5 millennia only to now face destruction by modern sunscreen and selfie sticks. There's something humbling about seeing time etched into stone paths no longer walked. The roads of Pavlopetri are laid out with a logic that feels strangely familiar, grid-like and intentional. The city planners, whoever they were, understood both form and function. Historians believe the site may have once served as a key trading hub, linking the Minoan civilization of Crete with the Mycenaean mainland. Its coastal location would have made it ideal for commerce, and vulnerable to rising seas. Indeed, the city's slow surrender to the ocean appears to have been gradual, not catastrophic. As sea levels rose, perhaps due to tectonic shifts or glacial melt, the inhabitants likely retreated inland, abandoning their homes to the tide. The sea, as always, was patient. One of the most remarkable things about Pavlopetri is its preservation. Because the site was never buried by volcanic ash or destroyed by fire, it provides an untouched snapshot of Bronze Age life. Archaeologists have uncovered ceramic vessels, tools, and even the remains of what might have been shrines or communal gathering places. Everything is right where it was left, give or take a few centuries of wave reshuffling. Yet for all its archaeological clarity, Pavlopetri still leaves room for mystery. The identity of its builders remains uncertain. Was it an early offshoot of the Minoans, a proto-Mycenaean society, or an independent coastal culture that vanished quietly, leaving behind no written language and few oral traditions? Historians still argue over who exactly called Pavlopetri home. What's clear is that they had access to maritime trade routes, engineering skills, and enough community organisation to build a city that would stand, even underwater, the test of time. A particularly quirky tidbit: some of the pottery found at the site was imported. That means these people not only crafted their own ceramics, but also valued and traded for foreign goods. Picture a Bronze Age dinner party: rough-hewn stone tables, flickering oil lamps, and a conversation piece amphora imported from Crete. The past, it turns out, loved a good aesthetic too. One of the more controversial discussions surrounding Pavlopetri is whether it qualifies as a lost civilization or merely a sunken outpost. Some argue that its relatively small size and lack of monumental architecture suggest it was more of a coastal village than a true city. But this misses the point. Civilization doesn't have to mean towering temples and gilded statues. Sometimes it's the quiet hum of daily life. Children playing in courtyards, traders bartering over fish, artisans shaping clay, that defines a culture. And in that sense, Pavlopetri feels vibrantly alive. The very ordinariness of its ruins is what makes them extraordinary. They remind us that ancient people weren't so different from us. They cooked meals, organised neighbourhoods, made art, and yes, probably complained about their neighbours. Their world was slower, saltier, and a bit more handcrafted, but it pulsed with the same desires: security, community, purpose. The beauty of Pavlopetri lies not just in its antiquity, but in its accessibility. Unlike deeper, more elusive underwater sites, this one can be visited by snorkelers and divers with minimal training. You can literally float above a 5,000-year-old city with a GoPro strapped to your forehead. But that accessibility also puts it at risk. Tourists can disturb delicate artefacts, boat traffic threatens to churn up sediment, and the sea, ever hungry, continues its slow erosion. To combat this, archaeologists have used some of the most advanced techniques in underwater surveying: laser scanning, photogrammetry, and even underwater drones have been employed to map the site in 3D. These digital models not only preserve the layout for future study, but also allow virtual visitors to explore Pavlopetre without disturbing it physically. Its archaeology meets The Sims, only with less interior decorating and more ancient algae. One ongoing debate involves the timeline. While most scholars agree that the city dates back to around 2800 BCE, some suggest it may be even older. Submerged structures nearby hint at multiple layers of occupation, perhaps earlier settlements buried beneath later ones. Could Pavlopetre be sitting atop an even older civilization's foundations? The answer, as usual, is muddied by silt and scholarly caution. But even at its most conservative estimate, Pavlopetre is the earliest known example of a planned city now submerged. That places it in a league of its own, older than Thonis Heracleion in Egypt, older than the Bimini Road, older than most myths about lost cities. And unlike many of its watery peers, Pavlopetre didn't need legends to find its way into history. No divine curses, no golden chariots, no angry gods. Just stone, silence, and the slow lapping of time. As we drift further over its skeletal foundations, something else becomes clear. Cities don't have to die in fire or flood to be lost. They can fade gently, inch by inch, forgotten not by catastrophe but by continuity. New people arrive, old roads sink, memories shift, and what was once a thriving port becomes just another reef, and yet Pavlopetre remains. Not loud, not grand, but persistent. A quiet reminder that even the smallest footprints can survive 5 millennia if placed just right. As we ascend from the shallow lagoon and the city recedes beneath our fins, a thought lingers. What other Pavlopetres lie waiting, tucked into coastal coves or buried beneath coral? How many more ordinary cities now sleep beneath the sea, their stories unspoken, their walls kissed only by fish? Next we'll swing southward, far from the clarity of Greek waters, into the deep blue Caribbean, where sonar has caught shapes stranger still, grids and pyramids that shimmer with speculation. But for now, let your thoughts wander along Pavlopetre's ancient lanes, where the sea writes history in slow, swaying script. The Caribbean Sea hums with secrets. Beneath its shimmering expanse, where coral reefs fan out like lace, and clouds cast moving shadows on endless blue, lies a riddle few dare to speak aloud without drawing a raised eyebrow. The question of Cuba's underwater pyramids. Tucked off the western coast of the island, near the Pinar del Rio province, sonar scans in 2001 revealed a vast grid of geometric formations nearly 2,200 feet below the surface. To some, they whispered of a long-lost city. To others, they screamed optical illusion. But one thing is certain. What lies beneath is strange. The discovery came not from archaeologists or treasure hunters, but from engineers. A Canadian company, Advanced Digital Communications, was surveying the seabed for the Cuban government, searching for shipwrecks, sunken Spanish galleons to be specific. What they found instead was a patch of seafloor that defied expectation. Symmetrical stone-like structures, some pyramidal in shape, arranged with uncanny precision across several square miles. At that depth, over half a mile down, sunlight barely touches. ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, captured grainy footage showing formations with flat surfaces, sharp edges, and right angles. The grid-like pattern suggested intentional planning. The footage was brief, the images ambiguous, but that was enough. The whispers of Atlantis returned louder than ever. Let's take a moment here. A city 2/3 of a kilometre beneath the surface. That's not a gentle sea level rise, it's a plunge. For these structures to have once been above water, sea levels would have had to be drastically lower, far lower than they were even at the peak of the last ice age. Geologists quickly pointed this out. According to standard models, that seafloor has been submerged for over 50,000 years. That number triggered a collective double-take. Civilization, as we understand it, didn't emerge until around 10,000 years ago. Agriculture, writing, cities, all those comfy milestones of human progress, didn't appear until well after this site was supposedly underwater. So if the structures were built when the land was dry, someone was building pyramids 40,000 years before we thought anyone could. Historians still argue whether that's even remotely possible. Mainstream consensus says no. advanced civilization in the Paleolithic era. That would overturn every timeline we have, and yet the sonar doesn't lie, at least not entirely. The lead oceanographer on the project, Pauline Zalitsky, described the structures as definitely not natural. She believed they showed evidence of design, perhaps even a city-like layout, with roads, plazas and temples. Her team posited that tectonic activity could have sunk the region suddenly, maybe during a cataclysmic event. That would explain the depth, if not the age. But without hard artefacts, pottery, tools, inscriptions, it remains speculative. Critics point to several problems. First, sonar can be misleading. Shadows, ridges and sediment formations often resemble man-made structures when viewed from a distance. Second, at such depths, human habitation would be unprecedented. No other known settlement has ever been found submerged that far down. Third, the few ROV images released are too low resolution to be conclusive. You could be looking at a pyramid, or a rock that just really wants to be famous. Still, the shapes persist. Flat plains, angles too crisp for chance, formations that seem to align and repeat. Some claim to see stepped terraces, like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, or the pyramids of Mesoamerica. Others caution that the ocean floor is a place of trickery, where lava flows, sediment slides, and coral growths all conspire to look like civilizations that never were. A fringe theory, still circulating in the internet's sleepier corners, ties the site to the mythical continent of Mu. Often described as Atlantis' eastern cousin, Mu was said to span the Pacific or parts of the Caribbean, depending on who you ask. Victorian-era writers envisioned it as a cradle of knowledge lost to a dramatic deluge. Modern scholars consider it pure fiction, but it's interesting how often legends of sunken continents align with the locations of these underwater anomalies. Cuban locals, meanwhile, have their own interpretations. Some coastal communities speak of ancient ruins seen by divers, strange lights below the surface, and areas where compasses go wild. One diver even claimed to hear faint mechanical hums from the depths. While likely embellished, these stories add a layer of folkloric texture to the mystery. And yet, no follow-up exploration has fully confirmed what lies beneath. Political tensions between the US and Cuba slowed collaboration. Funding dried up, the buzz faded, the site remains there, untouched, undocumented and whispering, like a book you started reading in a dream, only to wake up before the ending. Let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Suppose, just suppose, that the formations are artificial. Suppose a civilization unknown to current history once thrived on land that's now seafloor. What would that imply? A human presence tens of thousands of years before Göbekli Tepe, building stone structures deep in prehistory. It would challenge the linear narrative of human development, nomads to farmers to cities. It would suggest that civilization has risen and fallen more than once. One open scholarly debate even touches on this idea, the cyclical hypothesis. Some historians argue that catastrophic events, comets, floods, solar flares, may have periodically reset human progress. If so, our current civilization may not be the first, just the most recent. Of course, most archaeologists remain firm. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the Cuban site, while intriguing, hasn't delivered enough to shift the consensus. No bones, no bricks, no unmistakable tools, just sonar shapes and our hungry imaginations. But the questions persist. If it's not a city, what is it? Why such symmetry? Why such alignment? And why does it look so familiar? One quirky detail. When the sonar team overlaid the grid pattern onto ancient Mesoamerican city plans, like Teotihuacan or Tikal, some elements appeared to align. Shared proportions, recurring angles. Coincidence? Maybe. But if there's one thing history loves, it's a coincidence that refuses to go away. It's also worth noting that the Caribbean basin is geologically volatile. Earthquakes, tsunamis and shifting plates have reshaped its underwater topography countless times. What was land could become ocean with terrifying speed. It's possible, even likely, that once habitable terrain now lies under hundreds of meters of water. Whether it hosted pyramids or palm trees remains unknown. Still, curiosity endures. Every few years, whispers of a new expedition surface, plans to revisit the Cuban site with better tech, clearer images, and more rigorous science. But for now, the site sleeps on, half buried in sediment, its secret sealed tighter than a pirate's chest. And perhaps that's fitting. Not every mystery needs a conclusion. Sometimes it's the wondering that keeps the past alive. As we drift westward through the Caribbean, let your mind chew on the what-ifs. What if the sonar images are real? What if we missed a chapter or an entire book of our own history? What if the stories we tell about Atlantis, Mu, and sunken cities aren't pure fiction, but distorted echoes of something true? Up next, we cross the ocean to the eastern edge of Asia, where another underwater riddle awaits, this one carved in stone and cloaked in controversy. The Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Japan, is either one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century, or just a really weird rock. But before we descend into that mystery, let's take one last look at the Cuban deep. The sea here is dark, silent, and watchful. Somewhere below, an ancient grid may wait to speak, if only we're patient enough to listen. The East China Sea rolls in slow rhythm around the Ryukyu Islands, a string of volcanic landforms stretching like a dragon's spine across the southern edge of Japan. Near the westernmost tip of this chain, just off the coast of Yonaguni Island, fishermen often cast their nets into a deceptively tranquil blue. But in the mid-1980s, one diver plunged into these waters and came back with a story that would ripple through the archaeological world. He had seen a giant staircase rising from the ocean floor. Sharp edges, perfect angles. Too precise, he said, to be anything but human-made. The diver was Kihachiro Aratake, and what he had discovered would soon be known as the Yonaguni Monument. A massive structure. Some call it a pyramid, others a platform, carved, or perhaps fractured, out of sandstone bedrock at depths ranging from 5 to 25 metres. It stretches more than 150 metres in length, with terraces, flat plains, and what appear to be stairs, ramps and corridors. Underwater visibility in the region is often excellent, and footage from divers and drones soon revealed a monument that looks, quite frankly, like the forgotten foundation of a city swallowed by waves. At first glance, it's staggering. The so-called main terrace is a broad, flat expanse bordered by neatly cut drops of several metres, rising in 5 to 7 step increments. The blocks have 90-degree angles. Vertical walls loom over what seem to be passageways. There's even a curious trench shaped like a T, the so-called meander, that looks for all the world like a carved channel. And near one edge there's a megalith that some claim resembles a human face, gazing solemnly into the murk. The resemblance to human architecture is unnerving. The steps appear too uniform, the symmetry too clean, the proportions too deliberate. And for the curious observer, it's a short leap from observation to hypothesis. Someone built this. But who? Marine geologist Masaki Kimura was among the first scientists to study the site extensively. After years of dives and mapping, he concluded that Yonaguni was not just a geological oddity, it was a ruined complex, constructed by an unknown civilization and later submerged by rising seas. He identified what he believed to be temples, gates, a stadium, and even a road stretching to another submerged formation. He estimated the site's age at more than 10,000 years, older than any known city. If true, this would radically rewrite history. A monumental structure built millennia before Stonehenge, long before agriculture reached Japan, and at a time when human societies were still largely nomadic. It would suggest the existence of a sophisticated culture with the means and motivation to shape stone on a massive scale, and leave it behind without a trace. Historians still argue over Kimura's claims. The mainstream academic response has been largely sceptical. Most geologists believe the monument is a natural formation, a product of tectonic uplift, wave erosion, and the natural properties of the region's sandstone, which fractures along planes and joints in remarkably straight lines. Under this theory, the steps are bedding planes worn smooth by currents. The walls are natural breaks. The face is pareidolia, our brain's habit of seeing intention where there is only coincidence. One prominent voice in this camp is Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University, who has dived the site multiple times. He argues that the monument's features are consistent with natural formations found elsewhere along tectonically active coastlines. While he admits the site is unusual, he maintains that nature is quite capable of shaping rock into deceiving patterns. Still, questions linger. For instance, some divers have pointed to possible tool marks, straight gouges and scored lines inconsistent with natural erosion. Others argue that parts of the monument appear to be connected by corridors or intersecting passageways. There's even speculation about inscriptions or symbols etched into the stone, though these remain unverified and hotly debated. And then there's the cultural context. Yonaguni sits near the submerged landmass known as the Ryukyu Plateau, which would have been above water during the last ice age, when sea levels were more than 100 metres lower. It's plausible that early coastal communities lived here, and built here, before the sea reclaimed the land. That wouldn't make them Atlanteans or spacefaring crystal users, but it would suggest a level of organisation and capability not usually attributed to Ice Age societies. Supporters of the site's artificial origins often point to Jomon-era Japan, a prehistoric culture dating back to around 14,000 BCE, known for its pottery and coastal settlements. Could an early branch of this culture have engaged in monumental stonework? Mainstream archaeologists say there's no evidence of such capabilities, but absence of evidence, as they say, isn't evidence of absence. In fact, one of the ongoing frustrations with Yonaguni is the lack of artefacts. No tools, no pottery shards, no bones, nothing that can be reliably carbon dated or linked to a specific group. This has led critics to dismiss the site as a geological curiosity amplified by wishful thinking. But defenders argue that the ocean is not a gentle archivist. Currents, earthquakes, and erosion could easily have carried away or buried any material remains long ago. The debate has also been coloured by geopolitics and academic turf wars. Japanese scholars are often more open to interpreting the site as artificial, while Western academics tend to dismiss it. Some suggest that national pride plays a role. Discovering the oldest city in the world would be a cultural coup. Others caution against confirmation bias and the dangers of reading too much into incomplete data. One of the more fringe theories, though undeniably fun, links Yonaguni to the lost continent of Lemuria, or to Mu, the fabled sunken land said to have stretched across the Pacific. These theories, while lacking in scientific rigour, persist in part because they fill a gap. We want the story to mean something. We crave resolution, especially when faced with something as haunting and ambiguous as the Yonaguni monument. Let's admit it, humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We can't help but look at those blocky stairs and see intention. We see ruins where nature sees fractures, and sometimes we're right to trust our instincts. But often, the line between nature and culture is thinner than coral lace. One quirky detail: the monument rests in a region known for extremely strong underwater currents. Divers must be highly experienced to even approach it safely. The site's difficulty adds to its mystique, filtering out casual explorers and leaving only the most determined. It's like nature installed a velvet rope around her strangest exhibit. Despite the challenges, expeditions continue. Underwater mapping technology has improved dramatically, and 3D models of the monument are now available, allowing researchers to study its features without plunging into the perilous deep. Some open-minded archaeologists advocate for a middle path. Perhaps the site began as a natural formation and was later modified by humans. It wouldn't be the first time nature provided the blueprint and humans added flair. There's precedent for this after all. Early humans often took advantage of caves, cliffs and natural formations, enhancing them with carvings, etchings and construction. It's entirely possible that Yonaguni's builders, if they existed, worked with the rock rather than against it. They saw the bones of a monument in the stone and finished the sculpture. As our dive ends and we rise toward the surface, the monument vanishes beneath layers of blue. It remains what it has always been: silent, unyielding, and unfinished. Whether crafted by hand, sculpted by wave, or shared by both, Yonaguni asks questions that may never be fully answered. But that's the beauty of these places. They remind us that history is not always a straight path. Sometimes it winds, sometimes it sinks, and sometimes it waits for us at the bottom of the sea, carved in stone, daring us to look closer. Next, we follow the Nile downstream to the Mediterranean, where another sunken city waits. This one not myth, but unmistakably Egyptian, filled with sphinxes, columns, and echoes of Cleopatra. But for now, let the steps of Yonaguni linger in your mind, like dreams you can't quite explain. Solid, surreal, and forever just out of reach. The waters of Egypt's northern coast are murky, heavy with sediment from the Nile's endless gift. Ships glide past Alexandria, unaware that just a few kilometres offshore beneath these olive-toned waves lies an entire city, a once thriving metropolis that slipped beneath the sea nearly 1,200 years ago. This is not legend. This is Thonis Heracleion and its lesser-known twin, Canopus, sunken cities of pharaohs, priests and forgotten gods, resting in the brackish depths of Abuka Bay. For centuries, they were whispers in dusty scrolls. Ancient texts spoke of a city called Thonis, known to Greeks as Heraklion, a bustling port and religious centre near the mouth of the Nile. It was where Helen of Troy and Paris were said to have sought refuge before the Trojan War, where Heracles himself allegedly first set foot in Egypt, and where colossal statues once towered above the delta marshes. But by the time historians in the modern era went looking for it, Thonis Heracleion had vanished. Silted over, swallowed by sea and memory, then came Frank Goddio. In the late 1990s, the French underwater archaeologist and his team began surveying the seabed off Egypt's coast, using advanced magnetometers and sonar. What they found turned theory into fact. Beneath layers of mud and water, vast ruins emerged, temples, colonnades, docks and sphinxes, all perfectly aligned to ancient urban planning. It was as though the sea had gently lowered its curtain over a stage, preserving the last scene of a vanished civilization. Thonis Heracleion wasn't just any city. It had been Egypt's primary port for international trade before the rise of Alexandria, a place where Greek and Egyptian cultures mingled, where pharaohs came to offer sacrifices at the grand temple of Amun, and where political power pulsed through customs houses and marketplaces. Divers recovered more than 60 ships, hundreds of anchors, gold coins, colossal statues of gods and kings, and steles bearing inscriptions in both Greek and hieroglyphs. Among the most stunning finds was a 16-foot-tall red granite statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile's flooding, still smiling faintly beneath a crust of sea salt and time. One of the stele inscriptions solved a long-standing riddle. It confirmed that Thonis and Heraklion were not separate cities, as previously believed, but the Egyptian and Greek names for the same urban centre. Like a secret with two passports, it had lived under dual identities until the ocean levelled them both. But what caused this once grand city to sink? Historians still argue over the precise mechanism, but most agree it was a combination of slow-motion disaster and geological betrayal. The city had been built on silty, waterlogged soil, essentially a liquefaction-prone sponge. Over centuries, earthquakes and rising sea levels destabilised the land. Portions of the city collapsed into the mud, buildings literally swallowed from below, while others were inundated by encroaching water. The collapse wasn't sudden like Pompeii, but rather a centuries-long retreat. By the 8th century CE, Thonis Heracleion had disappeared beneath the waves, its population absorbed by the rising city of Alexandria. Forgotten, it became a myth, until it didn't. Adjacent to Thonis Heracleion lies another sunken jewel, Canopus. This ancient resort town was famed for its temples, healing sanctuaries and debauchery. Yes, Canopus was Egypt's Las Vegas, a playground for the elite, where wine flowed freely and the line between worship and indulgence blurred considerably. Here, archaeologists found remnants of the Serapeum, a temple to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, as well as numerous bathhouses and pleasure palaces. It's said that Mark Antony and Cleopatra once vacationed here, enjoying the salt-sprayed breezes and ornate gardens. And why not? Even god-kings need a break. One particularly quirky find, a cache of miniature bronze statues believed to have been tossed into the water as votive offerings. Among them, tiny figures of Bez, the dwarf god of music, humour and childbirth, often depicted with lion ears and a comic scowl. Apparently even ancient Egyptians believed in keeping the party spirits on their side. Together, Thonis Heracleion and Canopus paint a portrait of a world where the divine and the domestic were inseparable, where commerce, politics, religion, and leisure all orbited the water's edge. These weren't dusty temple towns. They were vibrant, pulsing hubs of life, glittering with gold leaf and rumour. But as the sea slowly claimed them, the Nile's sediment sealed them in a natural time capsule. Unlike other sunken sites eroded by open ocean, these cities lay beneath layers of protective silt. It preserved wooden ships, delicate papyri, even food containers, offering an unprecedented window into daily life in late-period Egypt. Historians were particularly thrilled to find inscriptions detailing economic regulations, priestly duties, and trade agreements, effectively the bureaucratic backbone of the city. Not quite Indiana Jones territory, but for scholars of ancient law and religion, this was the Rosetta Stone of municipal paperwork. Yet even with all this evidence, mysteries remain. How much of the city still sleeps beneath deeper layers of silt? Were there other settlements nearby that met the same fate, now completely hidden? Some researchers speculate that a vast network of smaller Nile Delta towns once sprawled across this region, many now buried or submerged, never to resurface unless technology evolves. And then there's the timing. The decline of Thonis Heracleion coincided with rising Greco-Roman dominance in Egypt. Some wonder whether political neglect, resource shifts, or even climate changes accelerated its fall. The sea may have finished the job, but the cracks may have started from within. A curious scholarly debate continues over whether the slow-motion sinking of these cities contributed to the legends of Atlantis. Some argue that Greek travellers to Egypt heard tales of mighty cities lost beneath the sea and carried those stories home, embellishing them into myth. Others dismiss the connection entirely, noting that Plato's Atlantis predates Thonis Heracleion's final submersion by centuries. Still, the parallel is hard to ignore. A splendid city, favoured by gods, undone by hubris and the sea. There's a melancholic beauty in all of this. Sunken statues lie on their sides, not shattered, just resting. Columns tilt, not broken, but slowly bowing to the weight of water. The cities didn't die in fire or plague. They were tucked in by the sea, carefully over time. Divers speak of an eerie calm as they explore. Fish dart through windows. Octopuses curl into the eyes of statues. And here, in a place once filled with prayers, politics, and parade, the only sound is the scratch of sand against stone. Thonis Heracleion reminds us that history doesn't just fade, it sinks, and when it does, it often takes the noise with it, leaving behind only shapes, textures, and the occasional golden ring lodged in the seafloor. As we leave the Nile Delta behind, we drift northwest toward a land once connected by dry ground to the European continent. Doggerland, they called it, a place that may not have had temples or statues but which held something equally vital, the lives of people who watched their world disappear inch by inch, year by year. But for now, let the sphinxes sleep, curled in algae and twilight. Let the temple steps rest beneath their veil of silt. The sea has kept their secrets longer than any tomb, and for a while longer it will keep them still. The North Sea is not a place most people think of as mysterious. Grey, often stormy and cold enough to chill even the most stubborn swimmer, it rarely inspires thoughts of lost worlds or sunken cities. But beneath its churning surface lies one of the most hauntingly forgotten landscapes in human history, Doggerland. Stretching from modern-day Britain across to the Netherlands, Germany and Denmark, Doggerland was once a vast fertile plain. Not just a little island or a sliver of land, but an entire region, some call it Europe's Atlantis, connecting the British Isles to the European mainland during the last ice age. It was a land of rivers, forests, lakes and grasslands. Mammoths roamed. Human families hunted and gathered along its shores. And slowly, silently, the sea crept in. Around 20,000 years ago, with much of the world's water locked in glaciers, global sea levels were over 100 metres lower than they are today. Britain wasn't an island. The English Channel didn't exist. What lay between them was Doggerland, named for the Dogger Bank, a highland ridge in the southern North Sea that today is a favourite for fishing trawlers and wind turbines. As the planet warmed and glaciers melted, sea levels began to rise. Over thousands of years, Doggerland's lakes became marshes, its rivers widened, its coastlines slowly erased. And eventually, between roughly 8,000 and 6,000 BCE, most of it vanished beneath the sea. But this wasn't just a climate story. It was a human one. Archaeological evidence tells us that Mesolithic peoples thrived in Doggerland. Flint tools, spear points, and fragments of bone have been dredged up from the seabed by fishing boats and oil rigs for decades. These weren't accidental travellers or shipwrecked nomads, they were residents. People who called this place home, who lived with its rhythms and relied on its resources. One of the most remarkable finds, a barbed antler harpoon, pulled from a North Sea trawler net. It's a tool as elegant as it is utilitarian, showing that the people of Doggerland weren't just surviving, they were adapting, innovating and thriving. Historians still argue how populated Doggerland truly was. Some estimate a few thousand scattered communities. Others envision a sprawling Mesolithic heartland, rich in game and fresh water, perhaps even hosting seasonal festivals or cross-continental trade. After all, if you wanted to walk from what's now Norfolk to the Netherlands back then, you wouldn't need a ferry, just sturdy boots. But what truly makes Doggerland so poignant is its fate. Unlike cities like Thonis Heracleon or Pavlopetri, Doggerland didn't vanish in one dramatic gulp. Its disappearance was gradual, agonisingly slow by modern standards but rapid in geological terms. A family might live their entire lives watching the shoreline shift a few metres inland, only for their grandchildren to move camp entirely. Villages became islands, and islands vanished. Water rose, not in a single wave, but in creeping inches. That said, one cataclysmic event may have sealed Doggerland's fate. Around 6,200 BCE, a massive undersea landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Strega Slide, triggered a tsunami that slammed into the low-lying coasts of the North Sea. Scientists believe waves as high as 20 metres surged inland, drowning much of the remaining landmass. For communities already struggling with rising waters, this may have been the final blow, a day of terror etched into the memories of survivors and passed down through stories that would later become myths of global floods. Indeed, many scholars believe that Doggerland's slow death may lie at the root of numerous European flood legends. In Norse mythology, great floods and drowned lands recur as themes. In Welsh folklore, Cantre'r Gwaelod, a kingdom beneath the sea, is said to have vanished due to human arrogance and divine wrath. Coincidence? Perhaps. But shared trauma often breeds shared stories. One particularly quirky detail: sediment cores pulled from the Doggerbank region reveal layers of ancient pollen, showing a sudden shift in plant life consistent with tsunami destruction. This kind of botanical detective work helps archaeologists piece together the timeline, confirming that what now seems like barren seafloor was once teeming with life. Flowers, trees, grains, all swept away. Today, Doggerland is a ghost of mud and fossils, but its archaeological potential is enormous. Recent technologies like sub-bottom profilers and seabed scanners have begun to map its long-buried rivers and hillocks, painting a picture of a landscape once filled with valleys, lakes, and possibly even human-constructed mounds. Still, retrieving more than hints remains a challenge. The North Sea is not a gentle archivist. Currents are strong, visibility is poor, and working beneath so much silt is costly. Most finds still come to us the old-fashioned way, tangled in fishermen's nets, clutched in the claws of chance. One of the more exciting developments is the Doggerland Mapping Project, a collaborative effort among European researchers to digitally reconstruct the drowned landscape using geological surveys, fossil records, and predictive modelling. These 3D reconstructions allow us to walk through the ancient land, see its riverbanks, imagine the paths between forests and hunting grounds. It's not quite time travel, but it's close. But here's the strange twist. Even though Doggerland was never a city, never boasted stone columns or gold statues, its loss may be more profound than that of any single sunken metropolis. Because Doggerland represents not just a place, but a way of life, one that ended with the sea's slow advance. It was the cradle of a forgotten world, one where families watched their world shrink day by day until it simply ceased to be. The open scholarly debate continues. Was Doggerland a cultural heartland, or just a temporary bridge? Did its loss trigger migrations that reshaped the face of prehistoric Europe? Some even argue it may have influenced the genetic makeup of modern Britons and Northern Europeans. Others say it was always marginal, more a muddy passage than a populated paradise. But either way, it was real, and it was lost. We often think of prehistory as fixed, immutable. Cave paintings, stone circles, mammoth bones. But Doggerland reminds us that history has shorelines, that the world beneath the waves was once part of our story, now whispered only through barnacle-stained flint and sonar echoes. Today, ships pass over the drowned valleys of Doggerland with no idea what lies below. Seagulls wheel, waves roll, and deep beneath, a forgotten country sleeps. As we sail eastward from the Doggerbank toward Italy's volcanic shores, the water warms. There, Another city awaits, not vanished by myth or ancient ice, but by seismic tantrum. A Roman pleasure resort, now frozen beneath the sea like a decadent Pompeii in reverse. But before we arrive, let the soft fog of Doggerland drift through your thoughts. The forest that once stood, the fires that once burned, and the people who once looked at the horizon and wondered where the water would stop. Italy's coastline shimmers with postcard charm. Olive groves, villas, and pastel-coloured towns clinging to limestone cliffs. But beneath the surface of the Tyrrhenian Sea, just off the Bay of Naples, lies something more hedonistic than heavenly. Submerged beneath meters of clear blue water is Baiae, once the Roman Empire's most notorious playground, now its most decadent ghost town. Think of it as the Vegas of ancient Rome, if Vegas had hot springs, marble colonnades, and emperors indulging in scandalous spa weekends. Baiae didn't just attract Rome's rich and powerful, it was their escape, their therapy, their secret-keeping retreat. The city was famous for its natural hot springs, heated by the volcanic activity that still simmers beneath the Campi Flegrei region. But it wasn't just about health, it was about status. If you were anyone in Rome, you owned a villa in Baiae, and if you didn't, you pretended you did. Julius Caesar vacationed here. Nero had a villa with a rotating dining room. Caligula predictably used it as a launchpad for parties that made senators blush. Even the cautious Augustus couldn't resist its temptations. Poets and philosophers described Baiae as a place where the Roman elite cast off their togas and occasionally their morals. Cicero called it a harbour of vice. Seneca, more austere, compared it to a sinkhole for the soul. Today, much of that lavish excess lies underwater. Between the 3rd and 8th centuries CE, a combination of volcanic activity and bradycism, a process where the ground slowly rises and falls due to underground magma movements, caused the coastline to sink. Slowly, sections of Baiae's luxurious waterfront disappeared beneath the waves. What once housed golden statues and mosaic floors became seaweed-covered ruins explored only by fish and the occasional daring diver. And what ruins they are! Underwater archaeologists have mapped a sprawling complex of villas, baths, fountains and colonnades. Many so well preserved you can still see the tessellated floors and marble pathways. In some areas, the mosaics are so clear they appear freshly swept, despite lying beneath several meters of water. Seahorses dart through what were once bedroom chambers. Jellyfish hover, where guests once sipped wine and recited poetry. One of the most impressive structures is the so-called Villa a Protero, complete with a black and white mosaic entryway flanked by statuary pedestals. Then there's the Temple of Venus, not a religious site, but an opulent domed bathhouse. There's even a portion of the famed Nymphaeum of Claudius, where life-size statues of gods and imperial figures once stood in flowing water, now wreathed in sea moss. Visitors today can don scuba gear, or board glass-bottom boats to float above this drowned slice of Roman luxury. It's perhaps the only place in the world where you can snorkel over a sunken marble atrium or peer down at fish gliding past an imperial courtyard. And Baiae wasn't just about fun, it was also politically loaded. Major plots unfolded here. It's where Agrippina, mother of Nero, is said to have planned her ascent. It's where Messalina's affairs may have sealed her fate. It's where whisper networks of betrayal, power and pleasure intertwined like grapevines at a summer feast. But like so many playgrounds of the powerful, Baiae overindulged. As Rome declined and Christianity rose, the city's reputation became a liability. The hot springs, once sacred to the nymphs, were rebranded as dens of temptation. Bishops railed against its immorality. As the ground sank and the water encroached, there was little effort to preserve it. Baiae, once envied, became forgotten, its ruins too scandalous to save, too soaked in excess to sanctify. One quirky detail: medieval monks, unaware that an entire Roman city lay just beneath the waves, assumed the occasional marble pillar jutting out of the surf was the work of giants, or remnants of biblical cataclysms. Locals avoided the area, saying the waters were cursed. It wasn't until the 20th century, with better diving technology and a renewed interest in underwater archaeology, that Baiae began to resurface, figuratively at least. And what emerged was not just a ruin, but a time capsule of decadence. Historians still argue about just how excessive Baiae really was. Ancient writers, ever fond of exaggeration, may have painted it more libertine than it actually was. Some claim the city was just a high-end spa town, more Monte Carlo than Gomorrah. But the artefacts, the banquet halls, the ornate statuary, the wine amphora, suggest otherwise. Baiae was not shy, and yet there's something undeniably melancholic about its fate. To walk or swim through Baiae today is to experience Rome's twilight up close, not through ruins ravaged by time or war, but through a city gently surrendered to the sea. No fire, no fury, just slow descent, a decadence that drifted into dream. The sunken villas whisper of parties that stretched until dawn, of lovers tangled in candlelit rooms, of philosophers arguing under moonlight, and all of it now lies quiet, wrapped in kelp and current. The debate over Baiae's preservation continues. While the underwater park is now protected by Italian authorities, concerns remain. Boat anchors, rising tourism, and coastal development threaten to disturb this fragile underwater museum. Some scholars advocate for more extensive excavation and digitisation. Others urge restraint, arguing that the sea, in its quiet way, has done a better job preserving Baiae than any modern museum could. And perhaps they're right. The sea has sealed Baiae in a perfect sort of amber, its walls softened, its sins smoothed, its story slowed. One can't help but wonder, had the city not sunk, would we remember it as fondly? Or would it have been scrubbed away, repurposed, sanitised by time? In some ways, Baiae's submersion preserved not just its architecture, but its mood, the luxurious melancholy of a civilization at its peak, dancing on the edge of decline. So we move on, not away from decadence, but into something deeper, the story of a flood that may have inspired every flood. One not confined to coastlines or myths, but whispered across continents, carved into memory, etched into stone. Next, we turn our gaze to the Black Sea, where a submerged shoreline and an ancient deluge may hold the key to understanding why nearly every culture has a story of the world drowning. But before we go, let the mosaics of Baiae settle in your imagination. The patterns, the parties, the perfumed air now replaced with brine. A city that once shimmered with excess, now shimmering with algae. A reminder that even the most extravagant empire eventually bows to water, to time, to quiet. Inland now we turn away from Mediterranean shores and the drowned decadence of Baiae, sailing not across open sea but into the shadowy stillness of an inland sea steeped in myth. The Black Sea, hemmed in by the coasts of Eastern Europe, Turkey and the Caucasus, has long been a crossroads, a place of trade, culture, and perhaps catastrophe. Here, beneath its dark waters, lies one of the most compelling hypotheses in modern archaeology, that a sudden, cataclysmic flood in this very sea inspired the flood myths found in nearly every ancient culture on Earth. This is the Black Sea flood hypothesis, and it starts with a question that has haunted archaeologists and geologists alike. What if there was a real flood, an actual historic deluge, that not only drowned settlements and reshaped landscapes, but also left such a scar on collective memory that it echoed through millennia? According to proponents of the theory, such an event may have occurred around 5600 BCE. Let's set the stage. At the end of the last ice age, the Earth's great ice sheets were retreating. Sea levels around the globe were rising, slowly but steadily. At the same time, the Black Sea was a relatively isolated freshwater lake, surrounded by fertile plains. Rivers like the Danube and the Dniester flowed into it. People settled its shores, hunted its forests and tilled its soil. These communities lived in a world not unlike Doggerland's, fragile, lush and fading. Then came the breach. Some scientists believe that the rising waters of the Mediterranean finally overwhelmed the natural dam at the Bosporus Strait, a narrow channel that now connects the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara. The resulting flood was not a gentle trickle. According to estimates, water from the Mediterranean poured into the Black Sea basin with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, raising the sea level by up to 150 metres and submerging over 60,000 square miles of land in a matter of months, possibly even days. To the people living on the shores of the ancient lake, it would have been apocalyptic. Imagine standing in a field one morning, birds chirping in the trees, your livestock milling about, the sun glinting off distant hills, and then, on the horizon, a line of water, relentless, rising, fast, comes tumbling through the valley. Villages disappear, trees vanish, people flee, and in the aftermath, only the sea remains. This wasn't just a flood. It was the birth of a new sea, fed by salt water that forever changed the region's ecosystem, and possibly its stories. Historians still argue whether this event directly inspired the biblical story of Noah, or the Sumerian flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the many other cultural myths that describe a great flood sent by gods to cleanse or punish humanity. But the timeline lines up suspiciously well. The flood myths begin to appear a few thousand years later, just enough time for memory to harden into myth, for oral history to become divine cautionary tale. The hypothesis gained momentum in the late 1990s thanks to marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman of Columbia University. They studied core samples from the Black Sea floor and found clear evidence of a sudden shift from freshwater to saltwater fauna, an aquatic exodus frozen in mud. Further sonar scans revealed ancient river valleys and possible shorelines, now far beneath the surface, and that's not all. Submerged beneath the Black Sea, researchers have found traces of human habitation, tools, wooden structures, even hearths preserved in anoxic, oxygen-poor waters that slow decay. These aren't just accidental relics, they're signs of a world that was abruptly erased. One of the more remarkable and strange discoveries was made by Robert Ballard, the same underwater archaeologist who located the Titanic. In the early 2000s, Ballard explored the Black Sea with a team using ROVs and deep-sea sonar. Near the coast of modern-day Turkey, they found what appeared to be the remains of a collapsed wooden structure, 300 feet below the surface. The timbers, dated to over 7,000 years ago, suggested a building that once stood on dry land. To many, this was proof. The flood was real, the stories were echoes, and the sea, as always, had the last word. But not everyone agrees. Skeptics argue that the transition from freshwater to saltwater was not as sudden or devastating as the flood hypothesis claims. They point out that sea level rise was happening all over the globe at the time. Why would the Black Sea flood stand out? Others suggest that the region was already unstable due to tectonic activity, and that gradual inundation, not a single event, accounts for the submerged ruins. Still, even those who question the flood hypothesis concede that something extraordinary happened here. Whether it was one dramatic breach or a slow march of salt, the transformation of the Black Sea was among the most significant hydrological events of the Holocene, and if it didn't inspire every flood myth, it certainly played its part. A curious side note, the name Black Sea may have originally derived not from colour, but from ancient directional labelling. In many early cultures, black symbolised the north and red the south. The Black Sea may have simply meant the Northern Sea, but the modern name, combined with the sea's eerie calm and occasionally opaque depths, feels oddly appropriate, especially when contemplating the ruins buried beneath. The Black Sea remains a challenge for exploration. Its depths, while not as treacherous as the open Atlantic, conceal layers of sediment that bury history like a protective shroud. But that very sediment has preserved wood, bones, and even foodstuffs in astonishing condition. Unlike saltwater seas, the Black Sea's lower layers are almost entirely anoxic, making them one of the best preserved underwater graveyards on Earth. This gives rise to another tantalising possibility, that beneath its surface, entire settlements, possibly even small cities, lie intact, waiting for discovery. The push for further exploration has grown. Advanced sonar mapping, 3D imaging, and robotic excavations may one day reveal detailed layouts of drowned communities, complete with walls, wells, and artefacts. But for now, most of what we know comes from partial scans and isolated finds. One quirky theory, floated by fringe researchers but still intriguing, suggests that the sudden submersion of the Black Sea created a massive diaspora, that survivors fled inland and spread not just their genes, but their memories. These migrants, carrying the trauma of the flood, seeded stories of divine retribution and watery ends wherever they went. It's an idea without much proof, but it underscores a central truth. When disaster strikes, stories follow. Flood myths are among the oldest and most persistent human tales. From the Aztecs and the Babylonians to the Chinese and the Maori, nearly every ancient culture has a version. A great deluge, a few survivors, a fresh start. Whether caused by gods, giants, or geologic forces, the narrative is the same. Water takes everything. And perhaps that's because water, unlike fire or war, is universal. It touches every life. It surrounds every land. And when it turns against us, it does so with relentless, indifferent force. As we drift now toward warmer tropical seas, toward another city consumed not by myth or millennia, but by a single morning of shaking ground and surging waves, the Black Sea's lesson lingers. Some losses happen slow, like the closing of a book. Others arrive like a wave. The morning of June 7th, 1692, dawns bright and hot over the island of Jamaica. In the bustling port city of Port Royal, merchants haggle in crowded markets, sailors swill rum before noon, and the scent of sugar, spice and sweat thickens the air. The city hums with life, if not exactly virtue. Known throughout the Caribbean as the wickedest city on earth, Port Royal is a pirate's paradise, a place where gold flows like water and morals are as loose as the rigging on a storm-tossed ship. Then, in a flash, the earth groans and everything changes. Within minutes, the thriving city is swallowed by the sea. Port Royal was once the crown jewel of British Jamaica, a raucous blend of trade and vice that flourished at the edge of empire. Perched on a narrow spit of land guarding Kingston Harbour, it had everything the colonial elite could want: strategic access, booming trade routes, and, crucially, little accountability. It was here that privateers turned pirates made their fortunes, and taverns outnumbered churches by a laughable margin. But on that June morning, a massive earthquake struck the region. It wasn't a subtle tremor, it was a seismic gut punch. Buildings crumbled, streets split open, and in a twist that seemed designed for poetic justice, the very ground liquefied beneath the city's foundations. This phenomenon, known as soil liquefaction, occurs when loosely packed, water-saturated soil temporarily loses its strength during shaking. In Port Royal, built on sand and reclaimed land, it meant that entire buildings and streets were quite literally swallowed. Portions of the city slid into the sea like toppled cakes. Eyewitnesses described houses collapsing into the earth, people vanishing in seconds, and the ocean rushing in as though invited. By the time it ended, 2/3 of the city was underwater. Over 2,000 people died, many instantly, others from injuries or the tsunami that followed. The survivors were left clinging to debris, praying in sudden sobriety for a city known for anything but prayer. Today, the ruins of old Port Royal lie beneath the silt of Kingston Harbour, preserved in eerie silence. Wooden structures, iron chains, wine bottles, clay pipes, even intact rooms, rest below the waves, sealed off by time and sediment. It's one of the only places in the Western Hemisphere where archaeologists have been able to explore an undisturbed colonial city exactly as it was in the 17th century. Diving there is like stepping into a paused moment. Tables remain where they stood. Tools lie next to workbenches. One tavern, they say, was found with tankards still resting on counters. It's Pompeii, Caribbean style, frozen not by ash but by brine. Port Royal is particularly valuable to historians because it captures the day-to-day life of a time often romanticised. Yes, there were pirates and gold, but there were also bakers, blacksmiths, enslaved labourers, and clerks. The city's sudden submersion meant that nothing was salvaged, nothing rearranged. What was lost was preserved, whole. One quirky discovery. A pocket watch recovered from the site was stuck at exactly 11:43 a.m, the moment the quake struck. A city's final heartbeat, captured in clockwork. The site has also revealed valuable insights into colonial architecture, urban planning, and maritime trade. Clay tobacco pipes bear marks from London. Spanish silver coins show the reach of Caribbean piracy. Amphorae hint at trade links as far as the Mediterranean. And then there's the human element. Skeletons unearthed mid-step, their lives interrupted without warning. Still, Port Royal's reputation lingers. Even today, some Jamaicans consider it cursed ground. Local legends speak of strange sounds bubbling up from the harbour, of divers experiencing sudden vertigo, of shadows that don't match the light. Rational minds chalk it up to currents, silt, and the weight of history, but the stories persist. Historians still argue whether Port Royal's destruction was pure geological bad luck or a cautionary tale. Certainly its reputation didn't help. Preachers across the Caribbean quickly pounced on the disaster, declaring it divine punishment for sin. Sermons spread faster than trade winds, painting the city's fall as a moral reckoning. But moralising aside, Port Royal's downfall was also a textbook case of bad planning. Built on unstable sand, with little regard for long-term infrastructure, it was a disaster waiting for a trigger. The earthquake, when it came, merely cashed the cheque. The British tried to rebuild. New Port Royal rose along the shore, fortified and sanitised, but it never recaptured the swagger of the sunken city. Instead, Kingston, just across the bay, grew to become Jamaica's new commercial heart. Port Royal became a quiet fishing village, its history buried both literally and culturally. In recent decades, efforts have been made to preserve the underwater ruins. Marine archaeologists continue to explore the site, carefully documenting its layout, cataloguing artefacts, and stabilising fragile wood with modern techniques. There's even talk of creating a submerged museum, a place where divers and virtual visitors alike can walk the lost streets without disturbing them. One ongoing debate is whether more excavation should be done at all. Some argue the site should be left untouched, its silence respected. Others believe it's too valuable a time capsule to remain hidden. Technology may eventually tip the scales, allowing for non-invasive scans and 3D reconstructions that bring the city to life without lifting a single stone. And what a city it was. Port Royal represented not just colonial power or pirate gold, it was a snapshot of human contradiction, a place of opportunity and oppression, a city of luxury built on exploitation, a hub of laughter, crime, innovation, and decay. All of it gone in less than 5 minutes. It also reminds us that not all lost cities are ancient or mythical. Some lived, loved, and collapsed within recent memory. Some weren't erased by time, but drowned by a single, violent gesture from the earth itself. Port Royal forces us to reckon with how quickly stability becomes illusion. One moment, you're sipping rum in the shade. The next, the ground opens, and your entire world slides into silence. Next, we sail farther across the Indian Ocean, towards stranger land still, into the whispered legend of Lemuria, a sunken continent that haunts the edges of Tamil literature and Victorian maps. Was it real, or merely the echo of colonial imagination stretched across the waves? But before we go, let the harbour stillness settle around you. Picture the broken rooftops just beneath the tide, the cobblestones hidden by sand, a city once louder than sin, now quieter than sleep. Somewhere in the vast reaches of the Indian Ocean, between the sun-bleached shores of India and the coral-ringed islands of Madagascar, lies a place that may, or may not, have existed. Lemuria, they called it, a landmass vast and ancient, said to have stretched like a bridge across the southern seas. Not quite a continent, not quite a myth, it lives in the hazy realm where science, story and speculation collide like waves against volcanic rock. Lemuria was first proposed not by mystics or poets, but by scientists. In the mid-19th century, zoologists puzzled over a curious problem. Lemurs, those wide-eyed, acrobatic creatures, were found in both Madagascar and southern India, yet oddly absent from the regions in between. This oddity led Philip Sclater, a British zoologist, to suggest that there had once been a landmass connecting these regions, a biological bridge across which early primates could have travelled. He named it Lemuria, after the lemurs themselves. Sclater's idea was published in 1864 and gained traction among geologists, who were still decades away from the plate tectonics revolution. Back then, drifting continents were a radical idea. Fixed land masses made more sense. So when marine fossils were discovered high in the Himalayas or on islands far from any apparent source, scholars often invoked the theory of sunken continents. Lemuria joined a growing club alongside Atlantis and Mu. But Lemuria was different. It wasn't just a sunken city, it was an entire land, a drowned motherland that, in some interpretations, gave rise to both human civilization and language itself. Cue the Theosophists. In the late 19th century, the mystical movement known as Theosophy seized on Lemuria as a lost cradle of humanity. Helena Blavatsky, the movement's founder, declared that Lemuria had been home to the Third Root Race, a now extinct group of psychic, spiritually advanced beings who lived in harmony before their continent sank beneath the ocean in a series of apocalyptic events. Other Theosophists added embellishments. The Lemurians were telepathic giants, they communicated with birds, they built crystalline temples powered by inner energy. And just like that, a dry zoological theory morphed into myth. Historians still argue over how this transformation occurred so quickly. Some suggest that the Victorian thirst for origin stories, especially ones that bypass the messy realities of colonialism and evolution, created fertile ground for such myths. Others blame the spiritual restlessness of the era, a time when science and mysticism were constantly exchanging glances across smoky parlours and lecture halls. But Lemuria didn't just stay in Europe's imagination. It found fertile soil in South India and Sri Lanka, where it resonated deeply with Tamil scholars and nationalists. According to ancient Tamil texts, especially the Silapatikaram and Manimekkalai, there was once a land called Kumari Kandam, a kingdom that stretched south of the Indian subcontinent and was swallowed by the sea in a divine cataclysm. These stories, rich with poetry and lament, described kings, poets, and temples lost to the waves. The idea of Kumari Kandam aligned eerily well with the concept of Lemuria. In the 20th century, Tamil intellectuals merged the two, framing Lemuria as the scientific validation of their ancient stories. Kumari Kandam wasn't just myth, it was memory. A sunken homeland that predated all others, the birthplace of Tamil language and culture, and perhaps of human civilization itself. One quirky claim: some texts assert that Kumari Kandam housed 49 ancient kingdoms and over 500 Sangam assemblies, councils of poets and scholars who convened to debate art, philosophy and governance long before other civilizations lifted chisel. The idea caught fire in cultural and political movements. For Tamil revivalists, it became a powerful symbol, proof that their heritage didn't begin with colonialism or even with the Mauryas or Cholas, but with a drowned land of wisdom and peace, far older than anything Europe could imagine. Of course, geologists remain unconvinced. The Indian Ocean, while home to sunken ridges and microcontinents like the Kerguelen Plateau and the Seychelles, shows no evidence of a vast, recently submerged landmass large enough to house an entire civilization. Modern plate tectonics explains the Lima conundrum through continental drift. India and Madagascar were once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, slowly drifting apart over millions of years. Still, Lemuria won't go quietly. Even today, the myth persists, not just in South Asian literature, but in alternative history circles, New Age retreats, and even certain fringe scientific papers. In some versions, Lemurians are ancestors to the Atlanteans. In others, they were the last remnants of a pre-human race, forced to flee underground or into the spirit world. Some even claim Lemuria still exists, in a higher dimension, visible only to those with the proper vibrations. What keeps this myth alive? Perhaps it's the allure of a forgotten golden age, a time before division, before war, a place where knowledge flowed like rivers, where languages sang through forests, where every ruin under the sea is a whisper from home. Lemuria is compelling precisely because it can't be proven, or disproven. It exists in the gaps, in the spaces science hasn't fully mapped, and with 95% of the ocean floor still unexplored, who's to say what sleeps below? A fascinating footnote. In 2013, a team of geologists discovered evidence of ancient zircon minerals on the Indian Ocean's island of Mauritius. These minerals were billions of years old, much older than the island's volcanic crust. The implication? They had come from a much older landmass now vanished. The team dubbed this hidden fragment Mauritia, a sliver of a lost microcontinent. The scientific community didn't leap to call it Lemuria, but the headlines did. It's discoveries like these, bits of ancient crust, magnetic anomalies, submerged plateaus, that keep the embers of Lemuria glowing. Maybe it wasn't a continent, maybe it wasn't home to telepathic giants, but perhaps, beneath the layers of myth, there's a memory, a record of real lands swallowed by time and sea, remembered not in stone, but in song. As we sail onward, westward again, back toward the heights of South America, we leave Lemuria in its shroud of possibility. Next, we'll climb into the high-altitude mystery of Tiahuanaco, a mountaintop city whose immense stone blocks seem to speak of flood and fire. But before we ascend, let your thoughts drift across the Indian Ocean one more time, past the dolphins, past the drifting sargassum, to a place where perhaps, just perhaps, poets once spoke with birds and the sea forgot the way home. Rising from the windswept plains of the Bolivian Altiplano, 13,000 feet above sea level, the ruins of Tiahuanaco or Tiwanaku seem to defy logic. massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, lie carefully arranged or partially toppled across a vast archaeological site, ringed by mountains and crowned by silence. This place, long considered sacred by Andean peoples, is among the most enigmatic ancient sites in the Americas. But here's the twist. Some believe Tiahuanaco was never meant to be found this high at all, because what if, just what if, this wasn't always a mountaintop sanctuary? For decades, fringe researchers and a few renegade scholars have whispered a tantalizing theory that Tiahuanaco might have once been near sea level, that perhaps it was linked in some unfathomably ancient past to a coast now swallowed by the Pacific. This theory folds into the broader idea of global cataclysm, sudden uplift, or, as some claim, the vestiges of a civilization drowned and displaced by rising waters or geological violence. Mainstream archaeologists date Tiahuanaco's peak to around 500 to 1000 CE, placing it as the capital of a powerful pre-Incan empire that spread influence across the Andean highlands. Its builders were master stoneworkers, carving the dense andesite with mysterious precision. The site includes temples, palaces, monoliths, and most famously the Gate of the Sun, a colossal single stone arch adorned with cryptic figures, some resembling rays or feathers, others, according to more enthusiastic imaginations, resembling astronauts or fish-headed beings. And then there's Pumapunku. Just a short stroll from the main Tiahuanaco site, Pumapunku is an engineer's riddle box. Here lie some of the most precisely cut stones in the ancient world. Perfectly straight grooves, 90-degree angles, and interlocking H-shaped blocks suggest a level of sophistication not often attributed to pre-Columbian cultures. How did they cut, move, and fit these stones with no wheels, no metal tools, and no written language? Even today, replicating some of these cuts would require laser-level precision. Historians still argue whether Pumapunku was a ceremonial site, an astronomical observatory, or some combination of both. Its design seems to align with celestial events, particularly solstices, and many of the carvings reflect a cosmology centered around the sun, water, and agricultural cycles. But for some researchers, especially those outside traditional academia, these alignments aren't just practical. They're cosmic. The idea goes like this. Tiahuanaco, like so many other ancient cities, may have been built on the ruins of something much older. Some even suggest it predates the last ice age, putting it well beyond accepted historical timelines. These theorists point to erosion patterns, magnetic anomalies, and the presence of fossilized sea creatures in surrounding rock strata. If Tiahuanaco was once coastal, or connected to a now-vanished lowland civilization, its current altitude would have required massive geological uplift, perhaps caused by seismic catastrophe. It's a big leap, but it fits into a pattern we've seen before: a lost civilization, a flood or earth-shaking event, and the survivors rebuilding atop the shattered remnants. One of the most enduring arguments for Tiahuanaco's ancient origins came from early explorers like Arthur Posnansky, who in the early 20th century estimated the site to be over 15,000 years old based on archaeastronomical alignments. Posnansky believed that shifts in Earth's axial tilt had caused the sun to rise in slightly different positions over time, and that Tiahuanaco's structures had once perfectly matched celestial events. If his math held up, it would place the site's origins at the tail end of the last ice age, smack in the era of rising seas and global upheaval. Mainstream scholars have since re-evaluated Posnansky's conclusions, pointing to calendar misinterpretations and a lack of corroborating evidence. But the idea stuck, and today Tiahuanaco remains a fixture in every documentary, YouTube channel, and coffee-stained theory board that dares to question the straight line of human progress. Still, even without cataclysms or sea levels, Tiahuanaco dazzles. One unique feature is its depiction of the staff god, a deity found throughout Andean art, usually shown holding a rod or scepter in each hand. At Tiahuanaco, this figure appears prominently on the Gate of the Sun, surrounded by 32 smaller icons, thought to represent days, constellations, or ritual cycles. It suggests a culture deeply attuned to the heavens, mapping time and myth into stone. And unlike other Andean sites that relied heavily on terracing and earthworks, Tiahuanaco was about geometry, gravity, and grandeur. Water canals, sunken courts, and subterranean galleries indicate a mastery of hydrology and design. The city wasn't built haphazardly. It was sculpted with a vision, one still not fully understood. Quirky aside, many of the stone blocks at Pumapunku appear to be modular, like pieces of a cosmic Lego set. Some fit together like puzzle pieces, suggesting mass production and pre-planned assembly. This modular style is rare in ancient architecture and fuels theories about lost technologies, or at the very least, a level of sophistication that belies the tools we assume they had. So who were the builders? The Tiahuanaco civilization left no written records. What we know comes from artifacts, iconography, and oral traditions passed down through Incan and Aymara descendants. These accounts often speak of giants, floods, and gods who came from the sky, or the sea, and who built great cities before vanishing. Whether metaphor or memory, it adds another echo to the chorus of global flood narratives. Today, Tiahuanaco stands weathered but unbowed. Tourists walk among the stones, llamas graze near the edges, and researchers, both conventional and fringe, continue to measure, map, and muse. One ongoing scholarly debate involves the tools used to shape and move the stones. Some believe that advanced techniques, perhaps involving obsidian tools, water-assisted cutting, or lost alloy blades, might explain the precision. Others are less generous, attributing the work to modern reconstructions or even hoaxes, though that's a minority view. There's also the mystery of disappearance. By 1000 CE, the Tiahuanaco culture had faded, its influence waning just as the Inca began their rise. Climate change, drought, or internal collapse may have been to blame, but like many great cities, it left more questions than answers. And perhaps that's the true legacy of Tiahuanaco, not just its grandeur or its age, but its insistence on ambiguity. It resists classification, it demands patience, it offers no easy answers. As we descend from the Andes and return to sea level, another cataclysmic tale awaits us, one tied to fire, ash, and the kind of thunder that cracks mountains. The story of the Minoans and the island of Thera, whose eruption not only shattered a city, but may have scattered the very idea of Atlantis across the Mediterranean. But before we sail, let your thoughts rest on the wind-cut stones of Tiahuanaco. Imagine the chants rising in thin mountain air, the sound of chisels on andesite, the gaze of a people watching stars long since gone. A city in the sky, touched by mystery, carved from a dream that refuses to fade. Sunlight spills across the Aegean Sea in broken ripples, glinting off the blue domes of modern Santorini, where whitewashed villages cling to cliffs like barnacles. But beneath this postcard paradise lies a darker tale, an ancient one, written in ash and silence. This island, once called Thera, holds within its collapsed caldera the remnants of one of history's most cataclysmic volcanic eruptions, an explosion so vast it may have ended an entire civilization and seeded one of the greatest legends of all time, Atlantis. The Minoans, centred on the island of Crete just south of Thera, were the Mediterranean's first great naval power. From roughly 2600 to 1100 BCE, they built palaces of painted frescoes, developed a complex writing system, and traded across a network that stretched from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Their cities, like Knossos, were marvels of engineering, with multi-storied buildings, elaborate drainage, and storerooms brimming with amphorae. But then, around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera exploded. The eruption was titanic, one of the largest in the past 10,000 years. Scholars estimate it may have been 4 to 5 times more powerful than Krakatoa. The blast obliterated the central part of the island, sending massive chunks of land skyward, forming a crater now filled by sea. The resulting tsunamis, some perhaps 40 feet high, would have crashed into the northern coast of Crete within hours. Ash rained down across the eastern Mediterranean, blanketing farmlands and choking sunlight. It was, in every sense, apocalyptic. The city of Akrotiri, a Minoan settlement on Thera, bore the brunt. Yet strangely, there were no skeletons found in its ruins. Excavations have revealed homes preserved with Pompeii-like clarity. Beds, tools, even wall paintings depicting saffron gatherers and blue monkeys. But no bodies. This suggests the residents evacuated before the final eruption, perhaps warned by tremors and smoke. Still, they never returned. Historians still argue whether the Thera eruption directly caused the collapse of Minoan civilization. Some believe it weakened their economy and trade routes, disrupting agriculture with years of failed harvests. Others point to later invasions by Mycenaeans or internal decline. But it's clear that after the eruption, something changed. The grandeur faded, the palaces emptied, the sea grew quiet. Enter Plato. More than 1,000 years later, writing in the 4th century BCE, Plato told of a grand civilization that once existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Atlantis, he said, was an island of great wealth, with advanced engineering, a powerful navy, and a divine mandate to spread its influence. But its people became arrogant. The gods grew angry, and in a single day and night, Atlantis was destroyed, swallowed by earthquakes and the sea. The parallels with Thera are uncanny, an island destroyed by natural disaster, a powerful seafaring culture that vanished, advanced architecture, mysterious disappearance, and a moral lesson buried in ash. Many scholars have posited that Plato, drawing from older Egyptian sources, may have had the Minoans in mind when crafting his tale. He simply relocated them westward, blurred the timeline, and dressed the story in philosophical allegory. One quirky detail often cited is the concentric rings Plato described in Atlantis' capital. Some believe these were inspired by the natural geography of Thera before the eruption, a series of curved ridges and central lakes that could have been exaggerated into myth. Others suggest Plato was simply echoing the shape of real-world city plans and idealized geometry. Yet despite the temptation to link Atlantis and Thera, most historians remain cautious. There's no direct evidence that Plato meant to describe a historical event, and while the Minoans were impressive, there's no proof they had the global dominance or advanced technology Plato described. Still, the eruption's impact is undeniable. Ash from Thera has been found as far away as Greenland. The blast likely created climatic disruptions that affected harvests and possibly helped destabilize empires from Egypt to Anatolia. It was a global event, one that must have echoed through stories, myths, and fears for generations, and the memory of that fear, of fire, wave, and darkness, may have shaped the narrative skeleton of Atlantis. Not because the story is true, but because it is emotionally true. Civilizations fall, islands vanish, the sea takes. In Akrotiri, the ruins are hauntingly quiet. Streets curve gently around painted homes. Wall frescoes show dancers, dolphins, and exotic birds. The art is light, celebratory, almost joyful. It makes the silence heavier. One gets the sense that these people didn't expect to vanish. They were building something permanent, something beautiful. And then nature reminded them of the terms. The excavation of Akrotiri has yielded astonishing preservation, thanks to volcanic ash sealing the city like a tomb. Staircases still twist between floors. Jars sit where they were last used. One fresco shows a ship in full sail, suggesting the Minoans understood the sea not just as a barrier, but a highway. They ruled through trade, not war. This peaceful maritime culture contrasts sharply with the harshness of their end, and perhaps that contrast, between joy and silence, between life and instant annihilation, is what gives Thera its mythic weight. There's still debate about when exactly the eruption occurred. Radiocarbon dating, ice core analysis, and dendrochronology, tree rings, have produced slightly different timelines. Some place it around 1628 BCE, others closer to 1500 BCE. The discrepancy matters when trying to align the disaster with Minoan decline or Egyptian records, but regardless of the date, the scale remains staggering, and the resonance endures. Atlantis, whether born from Thera or not, continues to fascinate. We are drawn to the idea of a perfect world undone by pride, a city that flew too close to the sun and paid the price. It's a tale as old as civilization itself. One modern theory suggests that Plato combined multiple stories, perhaps Egyptian records of the Thera eruption, Phoenician tales of lost lands, and his own philosophical ideals. Like all great myths, Atlantis may not be a place but a collage. Still, when one stands on the rim of Santorini's caldera, watching the sea shimmer far below, it's hard not to imagine what once was. A city teeming with life, ships bobbing in a curved harbour, children laughing in the sun, and then the sky turns black. As we leave the Aegean behind, our journey begins to gather its threads. For though each lost city tells its own tale, certain refrains echo. The rise of coastal cultures, the reach of trade, the silence after flood or flame. In our next passage, we explore how these stories, spread across the world, seem to rhyme. From Micronesia to Ireland, From Alaska to Indonesia, the myth of the drowned place rises again and again like a tide that never forgets. But for now, let your mind linger on the quiet rooms of Akrotiri, on the walls painted with dreams, on the wave that never stopped coming. Stories of sunken lands are not bound to one hemisphere. They ripple across the globe like echoes of an ancient wave, threading through languages and landscapes separated by thousands of miles and years. From the storm-lashed cliffs of Ireland to the lush atolls of Micronesia, from the marshy deltas of West Africa to the fjords of Norway, tales of drowned kingdoms, forgotten cities, and divine floods emerge again and again, haunting the collective memory of humanity. These are not all Atlantean echoes. They are local, rooted, and fiercely regional. But they all seem to share a common undercurrent. Something precious was lost beneath the sea. Let's start in Ireland, where the legend of Cantre'r Gwaelod, sometimes called the Welsh Atlantis, has drifted through centuries of storytelling. This mythical sunken kingdom said to lie beneath Cardigan Bay was once ruled by a wise and generous king named Gwyddno Garanhir. According to folklore, the land was protected from the sea by a series of dikes and sluice gates, maintained by a watchman named Seithenyn. One night, either through negligence or drunkenness, depending on how much the storyteller disapproves, Seithenyn failed in his duties and the sea rushed in, drowning the land. On quiet nights, locals say, church bells can still be heard ringing beneath the waves. Further north in Scotland there's the legend of Hy Brasil, a phantom island that appears on old maps west of Ireland. It was said to rise from the ocean every 7 years, visible for just one day. Some claimed it was the last remnant of a sunken land, a sanctuary of lost knowledge, glowing gold beneath a thin veil of mist. While modern historians consider Hy Brasil a cartographic myth, its persistence on maps from the 14th to 17th centuries suggests it held real meaning for sailors and storytellers alike. Across the world in the Pacific, flood myths are ubiquitous. The islanders of Micronesia speak of lands swallowed whole, of gods angered by hubris, of mountains that once stood where only reefs now remain. In Polynesia, tales abound of lands that were once vast and fertile, now reduced to narrow strips of sand fringed by broken coral. These stories, passed down orally, are rich in metaphor but often surprisingly precise in geographic detail. They reflect not just moral allegory, but memory of rising seas, of migration, of loss. Historians still argue whether these tales preserve real events. Certainly many Pacific islands are vulnerable to tectonic activity, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. Oral traditions in places like Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands often describe such events in vivid detail, including dates marked by the moon's position or the season's harvest. One chilling example comes from Simulu Island, off the coast of Sumatra. In 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck, the island suffered far fewer casualties than surrounding areas. Why? Because their elders remembered a story of an earthquake, followed by the sea pulling away, then returning with fury. That story, told and retold for generations, saved thousands of lives. In West Africa, the Fonanu peoples tell of the sunken city of Agbom, swallowed by the ocean after its rulers defied the gods. Some stories say the city sank with its market still open, its people mid-transaction, now living beneath the waves in a world of shadows. Nigerian coastal lore includes similar tales, cities eaten by the sea, visible only at dawn or under the right moon. The Americas, too, are rich with flood and sunken land traditions. In the Amazon, tribal myths speak of forested lands drowned by angry spirits, of great trees uprooted by water. In Alaska, the Tlingit remember a deluge that forced their ancestors to flee to higher ground, carrying children and fire in canoes through sheets of rain. The Cherokee, further south, tell of the day the Great Spirit unleashed water upon the land to cleanse it of wickedness, sparing only those who had heeded the warning. One particularly intriguing parallel lies with the Maya. Though most famous for their temples and calendar, the Maya also told stories of earlier ages destroyed by water. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred Quiché Maya text, we find an account of a world destroyed by a great flood, with humanity reborn from the remnants. Scholars debate whether this myth reflects real environmental upheaval, perhaps the collapse of pre-classic cities or climatic disasters. And what about the Aboriginal peoples of Australia? Their Dreamtime stories include accounts of coastal lands now underwater, stories that, when mapped against modern sea level data, correspond with remarkable accuracy to shorelines from 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. These are not fuzzy metaphors. They are place-specific oral histories, anchored in lived experience, passed from generation to generation with astonishing fidelity. Even the Norse, living far from tropical coastlines, spun tales of Ragnarök, the final cataclysm where the seas rise and the land is broken. While this was more apocalypse than history, it echoed deeper themes of drowning and rebirth, of lands lost to wave and time. What makes these myths so enduring? Perhaps it's that water, more than any other force, reshapes the world with quiet inevitability. Fire consumes, war destroys, but water erases. It moves with patience and power. It leaves no ruins, only outlines. And when it takes, it often does so without warning. One quirky academic theory posits that early human migration was shaped not just by curiosity or resource needs, but by necessity, forced inland by rising seas after the last glacial maximum. As ice melted and oceans rose, tens of millions of square kilometres of coastal habitat were submerged. Villages disappeared, stories endured. Another open, scholarly debate centres on whether some flood myths are hybrid memories, not of a single event, but an accumulation of smaller regional floods, tsunamis and cyclonic surges. Over time, these local events could have coalesced into a shared narrative, the Great Flood. One myth to explain many disasters, but here's the twist. Even as rising seas once drove people inland, they now threaten coastal cities anew. From Jakarta to New York, from Venice to Lagos, the water is coming back. And the ancient myths begin to feel less like stories and more like premonitions. In a strange way, the myths of sunken cities aren't just about the past. They're about our present. They remind us that no city is truly eternal, that the sea once held at bay by will and wall always waits, and that every shoreline is temporary. Still, there's beauty in the remembering. In the stories passed from mouth to mouth, from firelight to firelight, whether real or imagined, these tales offer continuity, a thread through time that links us with our ancestors, not through blood, but through wonder. Next, we turn our gaze to the tools we use to separate legend from reality. In the next passage, we'll dive into how modern science is reconstructing ancient shorelines and reimagining what the world once looked like, while others chase dreams through sonar scans and satellite images. But before we go, let your thoughts drift on these stories, of bells beneath the sea, of misty islands that appear and vanish, of cities that sing only when the tide is low. Somewhere between sonar scans and seafloor sediment cores, between photogrammetry software and salty old maps, lies the blurry line between science and speculation. It's the frontier where archaeologists, geologists and hopeful adventurers all dive deep, sometimes literally, to reconstruct a world lost beneath the waves. In this section of our journey, we follow the work of those trying to separate sea-level truths from seafloor lies, peeling back layers of ocean to see what used to be dry land, and perhaps civilization. Today, reconstructing ancient coastlines is as much a computational exercise as a geological one. Researchers use bathymetric maps, essentially topographic maps of the sea floor, to understand where the world's coasts once stood. By feeding global sea level rise models into mapping software, scientists can recreate landscapes from 5,000, 10,000, even 20,000 years ago. They can redraw ancient river systems, trace estuaries long vanished, and estimate where early humans may have lived, fished, and built their first homes. And sometimes those reconstructions match up with myth. Take the North Sea, where simulations of Doggerland's final days eerily align with locations of Mesolithic tools dredged up by fishing trawlers, or the Gulf of Cambot in India, where sonar maps revealed submerged patterns that, depending on whom you ask, are either lost cities or natural formations. These models don't prove human habitation, but they show where humans could have thrived, and that's enough to guide the next expedition. One tool in this watery detective work is LiDAR, light detection and ranging. From airplanes, researchers fire lasers towards shallow sea bottoms, measuring how long it takes for the light to reflect back. This allows for incredibly detailed mapping of features hidden just below the surface. LiDAR has revealed everything from ancient levees in the Mississippi Delta to entire Mayan city grids under jungle canopy. When paired with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, it becomes a digital scalpel for history. But for all its promise, underwater archaeology remains frustratingly difficult. The sea is not kind to secrets. Salt water corrodes, sand shifts, tides bury and uncover. And unlike land sites where excavation is methodical and precise, underwater digs are often limited by time, visibility and equipment. Divers must navigate currents, pressure and silt that blooms at the slightest disturbance, turning clarity into murk. That's why so much depends on sonar. Side-scan sonar creates images of the seafloor by sending out acoustic pulses and recording the echoes. When trained archaeologists analyse these sonar images, they look for anomalies, straight lines, sharp angles, shadows that suggest elevation. A square-shaped return, for instance, might be a buried building or a natural rock formation, or both. The interpretation is part science, part art. One open scholarly debate involves distinguishing cultural artefacts from geofacts, natural features that resemble man-made structures. This is particularly problematic with stone. Nature, it turns out, loves geometry. Basalt can fracture into perfect hexagons. Limestone erodes in cubes. Coral reefs form rings and ridges that mimic roads. The ocean, like an abstract artist, often paints in familiar shapes. That's where context matters. A single square stone. Probably natural. A series of aligned, equally spaced squares, arranged in a grid. That raises eyebrows. One of the more famous recent examples is the so-called Atlantis off the coast of Spain, near the Doñana wetlands. Satellite images and sonar scans suggested geometric patterns beneath layers of sediment. Researchers proposed that this might be a Bronze Age city, wiped out by a tsunami. Critics, however, pointed out that marshes often form such shapes naturally due to sedimentation patterns. The debate continues, proof elusive, passion enduring. Meanwhile, treasure hunters and amateur sleuths have taken to Google Earth and marine navigation software to search for anomalies. Online forums buzz with screenshots. Rectangles off the coast of Cuba, dark lines near the Bahamas, curious formations in the Mediterranean. Some claim they've found pyramids. Others swear by giant underwater grids. It's a modern-day sea chase, Indiana Jones with Wi-Fi. Of course, not all discoveries hold water. In 2012, a viral image circulated online showing what looked like a massive underwater city in the Caribbean. It turned out to be a glitch in the sonar processing of Google's ocean mapping software, a pixelated mirage. But the incident underscores how desperate we are to believe. Every blurry image becomes a doorway, every shadow becomes a step. Still, real finds do happen. In 2020, archaeologists exploring the shores of Lake Van in Turkey uncovered the remains of a 3,000-year-old fortress submerged beneath the water. Divers swam along intact walls and towers built by the Urartians, an Iron Age kingdom that once ruled the region. The discovery stunned historians and reminded the world that lakes, like seas, keep secrets. Even more promising are efforts to use AI and machine learning to comb through sonar data, looking for patterns too subtle for the human eye. These algorithms can process terabytes of underwater imagery, highlighting potential anomalies that might otherwise be dismissed. In the future, such tools could revolutionize marine archaeology, turning the sea into a searchable archive. And then there's the dreamers. Groups like the Ancient Explorers, the Casey Foundation, and countless unaffiliated enthusiasts fund their own expeditions, crowdsource equipment, and release dramatic YouTube videos with titles like Atlantis Found. They dive with passion, if not always rigour. Some use drones, others use intuition. Most are dismissed by academia, but sometimes even fringe efforts raise important questions. One quirky innovation: underwater LiDAR drones shaped like fish, designed to navigate narrow coral channels without damaging fragile ecosystems. They're still experimental, but their potential is vast, to peer into underwater caves, lost harbours, and reef-bound ruins. Yet with all this tech and tenacity, the ocean remains stubborn. The majority of the seafloor remains unmapped, unexplored, and unread. If there are lost cities down there, they're buried beneath not just sediment, but our own assumptions about where civilizations began, how they lived, and what they left behind. Historians still argue whether humanity's oldest stories are echoes of truth or reflections of fear. Was Atlantis a real place, or a metaphor for hubris? Were flood myths inspired by local disasters or shared trauma from Ice Age melting? Were underwater ruins ever cities, or just nature's uncanny sculptures? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. What's clear is that the sea was never empty. Long before concrete and steel, people built lives along its edge. They fished, traded, sang and prayed. And when the waters rose, as they always do, they moved inland or vanished entirely. What they left behind was not just stone, but story. Today, as sea levels rise once more, the work of marine archaeology feels less like a hunt for treasure and more like a rescue mission. We're not just mapping the past, we're preserving a warning. Because while the tools have changed, the tide has not, and the shorelines we take for granted may in time become the next forgotten frontier. As we drift toward the final leg of our journey, we turn to what remains unknown, what lies beneath the deep sea trenches in the unmapped zones, the here-be dragons parts of modern maps. Because in the end, the ocean keeps secrets better than any vault, and what sleeps below may yet rewrite everything we think we know. But for now, let your thoughts float over sonar pings and shimmering screens. Let the pulse of the past thrum in data and dream alike. Beneath the vast blue hush of the world's oceans lie entire worlds unseen, not in the shallow, snorkel-lit ruins of Akrotiri or Baiae, nor in the silt-covered secrets of Port Royal or the disputed anomalies of sonar scans. Deeper, into the abyssal plains, down the continental slopes, past where sunlight dares to travel. Here, in the unmapped, pressure-crushed silence of the Hadal zones, lies the true frontier, an underwater universe where human history might be whispered in echoes, if only we knew how to listen. The final section of our journey is not about what has already been found. It is about what might yet be waiting. Let's start with a fact that often gets lost in the fog of digital bravado. Over 80% of the world's oceans remain unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. That means that the vast majority of the seafloor, potentially housing drowned settlements, ancient coastlines, forgotten river systems, is as unknown to us as the surface of distant planets. We know more about the topography of Mars than we do about the deep ocean floor just a few hundred miles offshore, and therein lies the promise and the haunting. Take the submerged plateaus of the Indian Ocean. The Kerguelen Plateau, for example, is a massive underwater microcontinent, larger than Western Europe, lying mostly more than a mile beneath the surface. It formed over 100 million years ago, but includes fragments of continental crust. Some scientists even consider it the remains of a lost continent. Though not recent enough to house cities, it adds weight to the idea that entire land masses can, and do, disappear beneath the sea. Then there's Zealandia, the so-called eighth continent. Almost entirely submerged today, Zealandia stretches from New Zealand northward, hidden beneath the Pacific's swell. Roughly 93% of it is underwater, and while there's no evidence of ancient cities, its discovery in 2017 reawakened the public imagination. If a whole continent can vanish from sight, what else might lie in the deep? Historians still argue whether we should even use the term continent for these submerged masses. The definition is slippery. Do you measure landmass, crust thickness, political awareness? Regardless, the naming of Zealandia was a cultural moment, a reminder that our world's map isn't final. And then there's the South China Sea, the Red Sea Rift, the complex underwater terrain off the coast of Cuba. In each of these regions, sonar scans and submersible explorations have occasionally produced anomalies, grids, right angles, terraces, and walls. Most turn out to be natural, some remain unexplained, a few remain uninvestigated due to political tensions, funding shortages, or simple inaccessibility. Which brings us to the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on Earth. Over 36,000 feet below sea level, it's a place so extreme that only a handful of humans have ever visited it, all in specially built submersibles. It's not a likely place for ancient cities. The pressure alone would crush any known structure. But symbolically, the trench represents how little we truly know. What might lie on seamounts we haven't named? In trenches we haven't even charted? In underwater caves that twist like forgotten lungs beneath coastal cliffs? One quirky fringe theory posits that certain deep ocean areas harbour what ancient traditions once called undersea libraries, not literal books, but preserved repositories of knowledge encoded in stone, structure, or geometry. The idea is more poetic than probable, but it speaks to something fundamental, our yearning for hidden meaning in the depths. More credible are the stories told by the rocks themselves. Marine geologists analyse sediment cores, long tubes extracted from the ocean floor that contain layer upon layer of Earth's memory. These cores reveal climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, even traces of ancient tsunamis. Sometimes they hold pollen or charcoal, hinting at vanished forests or burned villages. They are the ocean's diary, written in slow, steady script, and what they tell us is humbling. Sea levels have risen and fallen by hundreds of feet over Earth's history. Entire continental shelves were once grassland, then floodplain, then seabed. Humans didn't just witness these changes, they survived them, adapted to them, built lives at the edge of water, lost them and moved on. The ocean, as it turns out, isn't just a destroyer, it's a chronicler. Some scientists are now using predictive modelling to identify potential underwater archaeological sites. They overlay ancient sea level maps with known settlement patterns, look for submarine springs, ancient sources of fresh water, and simulate where early humans would have logically lived. The results have already guided successful discoveries in places like the Persian Gulf and the Channel Islands. Still, the ocean guards her secrets. Most underwater discoveries happen not during deliberate missions, but by accident. Pipelines, dredging, or curious fishermen hauling up something heavy and unexpected. It's slow, haphazard. But slowly, piece by piece, we're reconstructing a world that was never meant to last above water. And here's a haunting thought. What if the most ancient cities lie not just underwater, but so deep beneath sediment that they are effectively fossilised? What if Doggerland was just the prelude? What if there are civilizations beneath the seafloor itself, trapped in strata, like voices in amber? One open scholarly debate revolves around what's called the black box problem. Essentially, we can't access much of the ocean without disturbing it. That means that, unlike terrestrial archaeology, where you can scrape and sift, underwater work often relies on remote sensing, which sees but doesn't touch. In other words, we may already be looking at sunken cities, but without the ability to interact directly, they remain suggestions, shadows. Yet hope persists. In Greece, new underwater excavation methods, such as water dredges that gently remove sediment, have revealed entire harbour complexes from the Bronze Age. In Japan, at Yonaguni, divers debate whether the vast terraces are natural formations or megalithic works. In the Caribbean, efforts continue to verify sonar findings near the Yucatan Channel. Everywhere, the map is being redrawn, not just in ink but in imagination. Because in the end, lost cities are not just places, they are possibilities. They represent the dream that humanity, in its deepest past, reached higher than we thought, travelled farther, built more, and that somewhere, preserved by pressure and silence, those accomplishments still exist, waiting for light, for touch, for understanding, and perhaps for wonder. Because that's what drives it all, the hours in submarines, the analysis of sonar pings, the debates in journal pages. Not just curiosity, but awe. The belief that the world is older, stranger, and richer than we have yet dared to accept. That beneath the waves lies not just history, but poetry. Not just ruins, but memory. So as we close this journey, this drift through stone and story, sediment and speculation, let the image settle. The sea at dusk, its surface calm, hiding multitudes below. Somewhere out there, a sunken street curves through coral. Somewhere a temple roof is dusted with sand. Somewhere a child's toy lies untouched for 10,000 years, and somewhere, perhaps, the truth waits. And now, gentle listener, as the final echoes of our journey slip beneath the surface, let your breath slow. The seas we've crossed were deep with story, ancient with silence. They whispered of palaces lost to brine, of dreams engraved in salt. They reminded us, softly, patiently, that time forgets nothing. It only tucks things away. Tonight, you've wandered through drowned harbours, past mosaics touched by kelp, through temples built for gods now nameless. You've stood at the edge of history and watched the tide rise. And though the waves took much, they never took the wonder. The ocean is still out there, holding secrets in its vast arms. Some are real, some imagined, but all are worth listening for. So let your mind drift now, unhurried. Picture the quiet swirl of sand around ancient columns. Hear the low hum of distant currents, steady as breath. Imagine stone streets under moonlight, visible only when the water stills just right. Tomorrow's maps may reveal more. Tomorrow's tools may reach deeper, but for now, we float, between memory and myth, between fact and dream. Close your eyes. Feel the world grow soft around you. You're cradled by tide and tale, rocked by rhythm older than speech. Sleep comes like a gentle wave, and beneath it, peace.